It all begins with intense memories of the day Demian first stepped onto a battlefield at the age of 25. At that pivotal moment, he had to take a life for the first time amidst the bloody combat. The memories advanced to time when he had already defeated more than 2,000 enemies in that terrible place. Blood covered the entire scene, a testament to the brutal violence of that relentless war. After so much fighting and resistance, the warrior finally collapsed, powerless on the cold ground. Suddenly, the scene changes completely to the sun-drenched exterior of a large and imposing mansion. A man explains to young Demian that the insurance money from his deceased parents will be managed by his uncle. The employee, with a cynical smile, asks the boy to simply sign the presented documents. The young man is suspicious of the whole situation and stares at the paper with extreme attention and seriousness. The uncle falsely claims there's no need to read everything and that simply signing will be enough to get it over with. He also promises to return the entire amount as soon as the boy finally becomes an adult. Demian clutches his own clothes, remembering that was the exact day his life completely fell apart. In a bold move, he tears the paper in half and demands that the money be deposited into his own imperial account. The uncle is completely shocked by the boy's unexpected reaction and audacity in front of him. Demian continues to dictate the rules and states that no one can withdraw anything without his signature and identification. With a sharp and determined gaze, the young man shows that he is no longer a helpless child to be deceived. Unable to contain his fury at seeing his plan fail, the uncle clenches his fist tightly, filled with hatred. Overcome with rage, he grabs Demian by the collar, demanding that he sign the document immediately. Instead of being scared, the boy just smiles, realizing that his relative is still exactly the same scoundrel. Without wasting any time, Demian lands a powerful straight punch right in the middle of the greedy man's face. The uncle falls to the ground, while the boy insults him without showing any fear or hesitation. The notary watches everything, trembling and terrified by the young man's strength and aggressive attitude. Desperate, the man rushes to add the new security conditions directly to the contract. Demian watches the scene, remembering that in his past life he was only 13 years old and couldn't do anything. However, the situation is different now because he miraculously managed to return to the past. His mind returns to the cold night of that brutal battle where his fate seemed sealed. He was surrounded by pools of blood in a scene of complete destruction and despair. The warrior inwardly lamented, knowing from the start that this mission was a veritable suicide. As a centurion in the army, Demian couldn't understand how 100 soldiers could defeat 2,000 enemies. Cries of agony echoed everywhere as the battle raged unmercilessly. The blood of enemies and allies splattered everywhere, staining his own vision. Looking around, he came upon the lifeless bodies of his companions lying on the ground. Consumed by guilt, the warrior closed his friend's eyes, apologizing for not being able to save him. He collapsed to the ground, bitterly regretting not having been strong enough to protect his squad. With his heart full of hatred and frustration, he struck the ground, cursing his cruel fate. At that point, the extreme pain from the serious wound in his chest began to exact its final toll on his resilience. Feeling his strength waning, he realized that his own end was very near. His helmet rolled across the ground, symbolizing the final fall of the brave centurion in that battle. Gasping for breath and covered in blood, Demian began to reflect on all the choices of his tragic journey. He wondered if things would have been different if he had joined the army much sooner. In his final moments, he silently pleaded for just one more chance to start his life anew. His mind conjured up images of when he led his men with determination and courage on the battlefield. But harsh reality hit him, causing him to spit blood as he realized his life was truly ending. His hand finally fell lifeless to the ground, sealing the end of his journey of suffering in the war. To his surprise, he woke up feeling the soft touch of bedsheets and realized he was back in the past. The young man stood up in fright, realizing that he had traveled exactly 17 years back in time. He stared at his small child's hands, trying to process that unbelievable reality. Demian quickly checked his abdomen for the mana core, which is vital for any warrior. Noticing that his mana channel was intact, he smiled, knowing that he could now train and master this power. The boy remembers that in his past life he lost everything to his uncle and had to survive by petty theft. As an orphan abandoned by his guardian in a past life, he took the blame for an alley gang and ended up in prison. From there, the young man was subjected to forced recruitment and ended up being dragged straight to the terrible battlefield. The boy thought his miserable life was completely over, but fate had something totally unexpected in store. Lying in his bed, he remembers how, miraculously, he ended up becoming a powerful centurion in the army. He silently reflects that even having reached that military rank, he ended up dying in the war anyway. Suddenly, Demian opens his eyes in fright, realizing that his time as a soldier has given him a very sharp perception. The young man sits up quickly in bed when he notices a dangerous intruder trying to break into his room in the silence of the night. While firmly gripping a dagger hidden beneath his pillow, the mysterious enemy begins to turn the doorknob. The bedroom door begins to open slowly, revealing the dark silhouette of the killer who tries to enter silently. Without giving him time to react, the boy leaps towards the intruder, catching him by surprise with a swift and deadly attack. Demian plunges his dagger deep into his enemy's leg, who lets out a cry of agonizing pain as he is struck. The young man cursed angrily, noticing that the blade had only penetrated halfway, failing to incapacitate the target completely. A second assassin emerges from the shadows, furious, and lunges at the boy, shouting that he will end his life. With impressive reflexes, the young man easily dodges the sword blow delivered by the enemy. The invader advances angrily, wielding his blade, but Demian perfectly reads his rival's every attack intention. The boy dodges with agility and precision, passing under the deadly blow and positioning himself for a counterattack. With pinpoint precision, he strikes the assailant, who spits blood after being severely wounded by the young man's attack. Wielding his bloodied blade in the dark room, Demian coldly asks who ordered that cowardly attack. The two assassins fall to the ground groaning in pain and bleeding heavily after being completely subdued by the boy. Without showing any pity, the young man grabs one of the criminals by the collar with extreme aggression. Demian pressed the dagger against the man's neck and asked if it was that greedy uncle named Pucker who sent them. Pressing his enemy to the ground, the boy demands an immediate response while the assassin trembles with pure terror. A mysterious voice from the doorway comments that the young man's behavior is far too frightening for a mere child. Demian immediately recognizes the new visitor as Muckman, who is surprised to already be known by the little boy. Upon seeing the warrior there, the young man realizes that the situation is even more serious and that he needs to act quickly and without hesitation. To focus on his new opponent, Demian simply slits the assassin's throat on the ground, ending his life instantly. The boy gives a grim smile, realizing that everything is falling perfectly into place according to his new revenge plans. His mind travels 17 years back in time, recalling how things tragically unfolded in his first life. Even though he tried to escape into the dark alleys back then, he was quickly captured by the henchmen. Without any chance to defend herself, the poor child was beaten and kicked mercilessly by the violent men of the gang. The young man wept in the rain, tied up and abandoned, realizing that his life had become a complete, endless hell. All that cruel trap and constant suffering had been meticulously planned by his own Uncle Pucker. Back in the present, the boy strikes the other intruder who is lying on the ground, eliminating any chance of survival. Demian finishes the dirty work without any remorse, bathing the bedroom floor in the dark blood of the traitors. With a look filled with hatred, he faces the situation and confirms that he was indeed sold by that wretched uncle. Muckman watches the boy with a sadistic and defiant smile on his face, eager to begin the ultimate fight. The warrior draws his sharp sword and charges at high speed toward Demian, ready to deliver a fatal blow. However, the young man dodges the slashing attack with extreme ease, sliding nimbly beneath his rival's blade. Muckman's eyes widened in complete shock as he realized that a mere boy had managed to dodge his fastest attack. Demian stares at him with disdain and silently wonders if that warrior has always been so weak and slow. The man begins to throw several consecutive punches into the air, while the boy simply dodges them lightly and calmly. Furious, Muckman yells as Demian recalls that after nearly dying so many times, he developed the ability to predict attacks. He can read the direction of their steps, the rotation of their waist, and even the subtle tilt of their shoulders. With this unique ability, the young man can see exactly where the enemy's blade will strike even before the attack begins. Muckman grows increasingly sweaty and desperate, unable to understand how a boy can anticipate his every move. The warrior attacks again, calling the boy a rat, but Demian finds the entire assault slow and extremely predictable. In a swift movement, the young man blocks the attack and strikes his rival's hand, sending his weapon flying across the room. Muckman's sword falls to the wooden floor with a metallic thud, leaving the warrior completely disarmed and exposed. Demian takes advantage of the opening and firmly immobilizes his opponent's arm using a perfect military combat technique. Completely humiliated and consumed by rage, the man screams in despair upon realizing he has been defeated by a mere child. Muckman falls to his knees on the ground, completely defeated and coughing heavily in front of young Demian. With his hand trembling with fear, the warrior realizes that it is impossible for a mere child to have done that. The boy stares at him with a grim look and delivers another swift blow, leaving his opponent even more wounded. Muckman shivers in utter despair, unable to accept that his opponent is only 13 years old. Demian calmly sheathes his blade and disdainfully asks if his opponent wants to know how he blocked the attack. He explains that he can predict his opponent's every move just by observing the moment he raises his arm. Mukman is utterly terrified and trembling at the absurd revelation that seems to make no sense. Pressing the knife to his enemy's neck, the young man coldly tells him to believe whatever he wants, for that is the truth. The warrior tries to threaten him, saying that he is not the only one there, and asks what will happen if the others find out everything. With the blade pressed against his rival's throat, Demian retorts, saying that he will die there and will not be able to spread rumors. The boy praises the man's intelligence and demands to know once and for all if it was really Uncle Pucker who sent him. Mukman hesitates to answer and remains in complete silence while trying to process the gravity of the situation. The young man warns him that if he doesn't want to spend the rest of his life limping, he'd better start talking soon. The warrior sweats profusely and stares at Demian in utter terror, unable to tear his eyes away from that intimidating presence. He wonders in horror how a child of only 13 years old can have such a frightening and merciless look. Mukman finally confesses that his uncle ordered him to be brought here nearly dead, and Demian replies that that was all he needed. The warrior is confused by the response, but before he can react, a bright line appears on his neck. He clutches his throat in utter despair, trying to stop the blood that begins to gush out uncontrollably. The opponent falls dead to the ground while the young man puts away his weapon, aware that he needs to resolve another problem before leaving. Demian knows very well that before leaving the place, he needs to clean up all the mess so as not to leave any clues behind. That was one of the few valuable lessons he learned throughout his life, which lasted until he was 30 years old. The warrior emphasizes the importance of avoiding making enemies, but considers what might happen if he ends up making one. It is of utmost importance to crush them ruthlessly and completely so that they can never again pose a threat. Meanwhile, the silence of the night covers the grand mansion, where Uncle Pucker anxiously awaits the outcome of his plan. In the office, the leader of the assassins glances at his pocket watch, commenting that the job must be finished by now. He tries to calm his uncle, saying that the boy will be dragged there as soon as his men finish the job. The man even mocks Pucker, commenting that he must be very angry to hire him because of a brat. With his face still swollen and furious, the uncle slammed his fist on the table, blaming Demian for ruining all his plans. The assassin asks him to wait a little longer and warns that he will not tolerate any reduction in payment for a slight delay. Suddenly, firm knocks on the door interrupt the conversation, causing the two men to look towards the entrance. The leader draws his sword, noticing the boy's arrival, while Pucker plots his revenge after signing the contract. The uncle remembers with hatred the moment Demian tore up the paper, and swears to himself that his nephew is a dead man. The hooded warrior walks slowly towards the door, puzzled by his men's delay in bringing the boy. Suddenly the door is broken down, startling Pucker, who begins to desperately wonder if his henchmen have failed. Demian enters the office wielding a spear, and the assassin asks if he is the boy, while being referred to as a lackey. The man becomes visibly irritated and surprised at being insulted in that way by such a young child. The boy asks if he isn't just that pig's lackey, and claims that's why he does everything he's told. Instead of becoming enraged, the killer lets out a loud, mocking laugh, amused by Demian's audacity. He calmly turns to his uncle and calls him over to make a new business proposal, given the way things are going. The mercenary leader warns that he will need to triple the payment, leaving Pucker completely shocked. Wielding his sword, the man argues that they suffered a great loss and that the readjustment is more than fair. He points to the tip of the young man's spear, highlighting that there is fresh blood on it, proving that his men are dead. Demian assumes his fighting stance, gripping his weapon firmly and preparing to face the leader of the assassins. The opponent exudes an intimidating aura and concludes that an unexpected variable has indeed arisen in that seemingly simple mission. Demian assumes his fighting stance, gripping his weapon firmly and preparing to face the leader of the assassins. Upon hearing that the service fee would be tripled, Uncle Pucker becomes completely desperate, not knowing what to do. The leader of the assassins threatens to leave immediately if the extra payment demanded is not accepted on the spot. Pucker looks around in terror, realizing that his life now depends entirely on that difficult decision. Demian goes on high alert when he realizes his opponent is starting to move with extreme speed. The uncle screams desperately, begging Montel to stay, and agrees to triple the payment to avoid being killed by the boy. With a cynical smile on his face, the mercenary leader sheathes his sword slightly and declares that the deal is sealed. He emphasizes that he doesn't care about the death of his men because, for him, that work is just a profitable business. With his red eyes gleaming with hatred, Demian coldly states that for him, the situation is much more personal. The boy remembers spending half of his past life rotting in the alleys like trash, running from thugs. He also remembers with deep sorrow the terrible moment when he ended up destroying his own mana core. Wielding his spear, he states with determination that he will not spare the enemy and orders him to simply prepare to die. Montel charges fiercely with his sword, calling Demian an arrogant brat as he delivers a swift blow. During the brief confrontation, the mercenary is surprised to discover the type of combat strategy adopted by the young man. The leader of the assassins notices with surprise that the boy is aiming with millimeter precision at his legs. Upon realizing his rival's skill, Montel concludes that this boy is definitely not an ordinary opponent. The metallic clang of their weapons echoed loudly through the office amidst the deadly duel between the two. They exchange quick and precise attacks, but the young man's reflexes rival those of the mercenary. The assassin attempts to brutally lash Demian with a series of cuts, drawing on all his combat experience. At the exact moment his opponent tries to protect his face, the young centurion anticipates his next move. Taking advantage of the opening, the boy attacks and opens a deep cut in his opponent's thigh, drawing blood. Even wounded, the mercenary attempts a counterattack with a violent blow, aiming to decapitate the young man right there. With godlike reflexes, Demian dodges the enemy's blade without showing any sign of fatigue or concern. Montel tries to surprise him with a quick feint, revealing that his true attack would come with his other weapon. To the mercenary leader's surprise and dismay, the boy dodges his trick as if he already knew what he was going to do. The assassin is perplexed to realize that the young man has discovered that the sword in his right hand was the real threat. Without wasting any time, Demian strikes his opponent in the chest with a devastating counterattack that sends him flying backward. The boy stares at him with superiority and says coldly that he knew exactly what his plan was from the beginning. The enemy grinds his teeth in fury and curses Demian, unable to accept that he is being humiliated by a brat. Montel lunges forward desperately, shouting that he will kill him, but the young man delivers a precise and merciless blow to end the fight. The precise blow strikes the opponent's neck, causing blood to splatter into the air as his vision blurs. The leader of the assassins collapses to the ground, powerless, choking on his own blood in his final moments. Demian watches him fall and concludes that despite being stronger than Muckman, he was still nothing more than backwater trash. The boy turns around with a dark, murderous look, walking slowly towards his next and final target. Pucker falls to his knees on the floor, trembling with terror, and begins desperately pleading for Demian to listen to him. The young man completely ignores the cowardly pleas of his relative and continues advancing menacingly. The uncle screams in terror, gesturing backward and begging his nephew not to come near him under any circumstances. A terrible scream of agony echoes from the office, cutting through the silence of that cold night in the grand mansion. The following day, the notary informs him that he will deposit 6 platinum coins and 650 gold coins for him. Demian recalls that the first important thing he did after resolving his uncle's situation was to collect his insurance. The man bows respectfully, thanking him for his trust, and says he looks forward to working with him in the future. Before finishing, the employee timidly asks if he could know what the young man's next destination will be. Outside, a luxurious carriage awaits Demian, indicating that he is about to depart on a long journey. The boy replies firmly that he intends to enlist in the army, leaving the official completely perplexed. Demian enters the carriage, revealing that there are some important people he desperately needs to see again. As the carriage moves towards the mountains, the young man observes the landscape through the window with seriousness. He reflects that although his old comrades are there, the army is the only place where he truly belongs. The young man knows that in just 5 years the world will change, and many boys will be forced to enlist in the army. The warrior knows very well that a terrible era of war from which no one will be able to escape is rapidly approaching. Smiling, he places his hand on his chest, relieved that he hadn't destroyed his mana core this time and could now train his power. Demian decides that instead of enlisting late at age 25, it's much better to volunteer while he's still young. First, he plans to train for a week using a special cultivation method, and then enroll in the training camp. The young man observes the landscape, determined not to be a mere puppet of fate and the relentless flow of that era any longer. With unwavering determination shining in his eyes, the boy promises himself that this time he will govern his own destiny. A week later, the carriage finally arrives at the gates of an imposing and bustling military training camp. The young man performs an extremely fast attack with his spear, generating shockwaves that surprise those present. The other recruits watch, intrigued, not understanding where such a young boy learned such an advanced combat technique. Demian hits the target with precision and force, but his expression shows dissatisfaction with the efficiency of his movements. Looking at his own hands, he realizes that at the current pace he will need bandages because his body is still very weak. He notices that his current hands are much softer and weaker compared to the calloused hands he possessed in his past life. A camp instructor approaches Demian and politely asks if he wishes to sign up as a recruit. The man praises his skill with the spear, and Demian wonders if the instructor recognized the special combat technique. Despite its pretentious name as the kingdom's greatest spear art, that technique was the most common among ordinary soldiers. To avoid suspicion, Demian lies, saying he learned the technique from his late father, and the instructor apologizes for the question. The boy says there's no problem and affirms that his father was very proud to serve, which guarantees him a perfect score on the test. Seeing the boy's humble behavior, the instructor feels a little embarrassed and tries to gesture in a friendly way. Coughing slightly to disguise his embarrassment, the officer asks the talented young warrior what his name is. The boy stands firmly and replies loudly and clearly that his given name is Demian. The man gives him a friendly pat on the shoulder, wishing him good luck, while the young man hides his mystical energy in his hand. Demian politely thanks the instructor for his encouragement as he watches him climb the stairs to the main courtyard. Left alone for a moment, the young man begins to concentrate a mysterious mana energy around his waist. He feels an incredibly warm and powerful sensation flowing through his new and intact channels of mystical energy. The boy smiles radiantly as he realizes that he is finally able to freely conjure and manipulate the power of mana. The magical stream begins to glow steadily around her abdomen, illuminating the area with a purple light. This feeling of absolute power and control is something he never imagined he would be able to experience again. Demian silently celebrates being able to use magical energy, which completely changes his combat perspective. He used a mystical method created in the future by a genius that, despite being very rigorous, was the most efficient of all. Since his mana channel had been destroyed in his past life, he desperately memorized every possible technique. He recalls that his former comrades in arms used to mock him for studying methods he couldn't use. At the time, the boy used to get extremely annoyed by the teasing, but now he realizes that all that effort was worth it. All that mockery served to strengthen him, and now he only needs to focus on passing the entrance exam. With his gaze focused, he mentally prepares himself for the next stages of the test, which promise to be challenging. Walking through the camp, Demian suddenly remembers that a certain skilled warrior trained in that very spot. The image of a strong, white-haired warrior comes to mind, leaving him curious about his current appearance. In the camp courtyard, dozens of young recruits gather in formation to begin the first stage of the exam. The first challenge consists of something simple but extremely exhausting: lifting an immense rock off the ground. Lifting a 30-kilogram block above your head is ideal for quickly eliminating weak and pretentious newcomers. Demian lifts the enormous stone block with remarkable ease and earns the immediate approval of the evaluators. He smiles contentedly, knowing that having reached the first level of mana, such a simple physical test is no challenge. With the conclusion of the first strength test, all recruits gather to hear instructions for the next challenge. The official evaluator steps onto the podium and loudly announces the start of the second and dreaded part of the military exam. The second stage will be a long-distance race where everyone must cross the finish line within the time limit. The man warns that minor collisions and bumps will be allowed along the route, but emphasizes a very important warning. Attacking other competitors is strictly prohibited, leading Demian to deduce that there are instructors disguised in the crowd. He also warns that any deviation from the official route will result in the candidate's immediate disqualification from the test. The young man gives a discreet and confident smile, thinking that this violent race will be extremely fun to compete in. The long, red dirt track stretches across the landscape, indicating the difficult journey the young people will have to face. While stretching, Demian is surprised by another young man who approaches and comments that they are in the same group. The boy is a little confused, and the blonde boy confirms, saying that he had been keeping an eye on him in the courtyard for some time. Demian wonders why he attracts so much attention, and looking at the boy's face, he feels he's seen him somewhere before. The blonde boy smiles at Demian and asks good-naturedly if he's asking that question seriously. Suddenly, the boy approaches and whispers in Demian's ear that he discovered he is using mana flow. He explains that although peasants can use magic, they generally need sponsorship or a mysterious origin. Demian is surprised by that realization, and before he can ask, the blonde man inquires about the young warrior's name. The blonde boy introduces himself as Appel, surprising Demian as he realizes that this boy will become a legendary warrior. Demian remembers that Appel was a legend who became a general and count at the age of 30, being the greatest success of the commoners. Appel comments that he was bored because there was no one his age there, and suggests that they both do their best on the test. They shake hands and Demian accepts the proposal, thinking there's no reason to start the relationship on bad terms. The instructor on the podium uses a megaphone to order all candidates to prepare for the start of the exam. With the starting signal, the recruits begin to sprint down the dirt path, raising a large cloud of dust. Demian starts running, maintaining a steady pace, but focused on analyzing the behavior of all the other competitors. The young man takes off at very high speed right at the start of the race, leaving several competitors surprised and behind. They approach a difficult obstacle known as the Wailing Wall, which determines who will actually pass. Appel suggests they just follow the group and overtake everyone at the end, but the boy has other plans. Demian speeds ahead, explaining that the slower pace doesn't suit him at all. Appel is completely speechless when he sees the incredible acceleration of his new friend, who runs like a true lightning bolt. Further back, some recruits plan to maintain a calm pace, believing the test will only become difficult in the final moments. A competitor who was running at a steady pace notices a strange, rapid movement approaching from behind him. He becomes indignant when he sees Demian flying past him and calls him crazy for running so fast right at the start. Two disguised instructors comment on the boy's energy and decide to give him just a little scare. The brute grins sadistically, imagining the impact the boy will suffer if he collides with his iron shoulders. However, Demian merely touches the giant's hip swiftly, politely asking permission to pass. With an acrobatic and graceful leap, the boy easily passes over the shoulder of the big man, who is left perplexed. The young centurion lands gracefully and continues his swift run, leaving the instructors far behind. The brute shouts furiously, ordering his companion to stop the boy from continuing his dash. Demian knows that the training officers are more experienced than the recruits, but he doesn't let them intimidate him. To the experienced young warrior, those men were ultimately nothing more than simple camp instructors. Seeing the commotion caused by Demian, the other competitors burst into laughter, finding his audacity funny. Appel also smiles slightly, determined to quicken his pace because he doesn't want to be left behind by his friend. He uses his own magic technique and launches himself at incredible speed, overtaking his competitors. Motivated by his example, the other candidates decide to give it their all, believing they can do the same as he did. A huge stampede of recruits begins to run chaotically, driving the officers to despair as they try to maintain control. Shouts of effort and exhaustion echo through the courtyard as the group rushes recklessly down the running track. Two instructors observe the commotion on the track and suggest sending more guards to contain the excitement of the newcomers. Raymond, the chief instructor, approaches with firm steps and orders the officers to simply leave the situation as it is. The superior argues that sending more guards would make it seem like the exam is rigged, and that daring is a skill. Demian continues running steadily, knowing that the resulting commotion will test the limits of each recruit. The experienced Raymond gives a discreet smile, satisfied to have noticed the boy's immense potential in creating variables. He notes that the young man's bold attitude was the necessary trigger to set the entire crowd of recruits in motion. The captain reflects that the true leaders on the battlefield are those capable of igniting that spark in others. Demian gasped for breath, realizing that of the 30 laps required, he was finally completing the penultimate one. Concentrating his last bit of strength, the young man quickens his pace, knowing that this is the final lap to secure victory. Appel surprises the boy by keeping pace with him in the race, showing that he also possesses excellent physical stamina. The blonde man remarks that Demian still seems full of energy and casually asks if all of that was planned. Looking back and seeing his competitors collapsed on the ground, Demian thinks that without the use of mana they would be evenly matched. With a sarcastic smile on his face, he replies that when you have a good card in your hand, there's no reason not to use it. Appel lets out a friendly laugh and comments that he finds his new training partner an extremely interesting boy. Demian returns the compliment as the two cross the finish line of the grueling race together with ease. The examiner, slightly out of breath, announces that both have successfully passed the difficult running test of the exam. Meanwhile, in a luxurious room, a general reviews some reports and hears rumors about a brilliant boy in training. The messenger confirms that instructor Raymond made contact and informed them that the mysterious young man is only 13 years old. Sitting at his desk, the one-eyed general reflects that if the strict Raymond found him interesting, there must be a good reason. The high-ranking commander confesses to his subordinate that he is extremely curious to meet this prodigy. The general stands imposingly in his black cloak and tries to remember the name of that young and promising recruit. Meanwhile, in the courtyard of the military training camp, dozens of recruits gather, eager to see the results. Several candidates who failed cry and curse in frustration, unable to accept their failure in the exam. While those who pass celebrate and shout with joy, Demian calmly observes everything and wonders if this is a reason for celebration. The young man remembers that in the future military service would be mandatory, and everyone would do everything to escape that hell. Thinking about it that way, the boy concludes that current times are still very peaceful until someone shouts his name. Demian turns around and finds Appel approaching with a smile, waving and congratulating the boy on now being classmates. The young centurion asks in surprise if his friend also passed the test, and the blond man confirms, saying he saw his name on the list. Appel points to the top of the mural where Demian is written at age 13, and comments that he only realized his age at that moment. The blond man says he hopes to work with him in the future, although he knows they might end up being assigned to different units. He reminds them that they have a week before the official enlistment, and asks what the boy intends to do during that time. Demian replies that he will be quite busy, as he has several important matters to resolve throughout the week. Appel puts his arm around the boy's shoulder, asking what he will do, and the young man simply says that he will buy supplies for the barracks. The blond man warns that regular military boots are as hard as rock, and strongly recommends that he buy soft insoles. Demian listens to the advice, knowing it very well from his own past life experience, but prefers to keep the secret. He thanks him for the advice and promises to keep the tip in mind while the blond man laughs, relaxed at his response. Demian returns the question and asks what the blond man will be doing during the week, receiving a vague answer that he also has tasks. The boy simply nods, finding the blond boy's mysterious manner curious, the latter trying to disguise it by whistling with a comical expression. Wishing them good luck with their preparations, Demian bids them farewell and announces that he's leaving first, while Appel waves amicably. Appel walks back alone across the courtyard with a smile on his face when a hooded figure silently appears behind him. The elderly man in dark clothes asks who that boy is, and the boy greets him, calling him Alan. The blond man watches his friend walk away and wonders thoughtfully what Demian's real reason for wanting to enlist could be. He reflects that, given the amount of mana the boy can control, it's clear he's not an ordinary young man his age. Appel remembers when his friend accused him of bragging during the race, and finds it funny how that conversation sounded. During that race, Demian had thought to himself that the army was indeed the only place in the world where he belonged. The blond man concludes that his friend certainly has his own secrets and personal motives that he cannot easily share. He senses that Demian is someone he will continue to see for a long time, leaving the old servant confused by that statement. Appel changes the subject, telling them to leave, and the old man formally informs them that the young master's carriage is already at the ready. The blond man whispers irritably, asking the old man never to call him young master in public so as not to draw attention. Elder Allen respectfully apologizes for the slip-up as the two leave the military camp courtyard. The scene shifts to the beautiful and peaceful setting of the kingdom's capital, showcasing the grandeur of its sun-drenched buildings. Walking through the bustling streets of the big city, Demian observes the people and finds it hard to believe what he sees. The boy notices the merchants selling their wares, remembering that the capital he knew in the future was much worse. In his past life, the streets were dark and miserable, filled with starving beggars pleading for a meager piece of bread. The young man knows that all the joy in the city will change in 5 years, and decides to prepare as much as possible before the war arrives. To begin his survival plan, the boy's first step is to locate the famous Weak Merchant Guild. He knows that when the conflict begins, weapons, practical artifacts, and military rations will become the most valuable items in the world. Naturally, the wealthy merchant guilds will assume an extremely crucial role in supplying the fighting forces. Demian remembers that in the future, the richest and most powerful merchant guild on the entire continent was none other than the Weak Guild. In his war memoirs, wounded soldiers lay desolate in camps set up in the middle of the scorching desert. At that time, a subordinate ran to Demian, excitedly announcing that relief supplies were on their way. The captain gazed towards the barren horizon and identified the large carriages belonging to the influential Weak Guild. The soldier next to him complained angrily that while they risked their lives in battle, the merchants only profited greatly. Demian countered the soldier, reminding him that without the wheat and weapons they sold, all the soldiers would be dead. The subordinate humbly admitted that he knew about it, but confessed that he felt only a little bitterness in his heart. The captain considered that, in any case, consistently funding charities with that money was not an easy task. He then ordered all the soldiers to fetch their provisions, and the men promptly obeyed, saluting. In his memories, the captain observes the soldiers resting at the camp, while the guild's supplies continue to arrive. His subordinate from a past life points forward, revealing that this man must be the master of the Weak Merchant Guild. The boy remembers that the master wore a long white hooded cloak that mysteriously partially covered his face. From what I remembered, he had a somewhat youthful appearance, but he seemed to have a very arrogant and overbearing demeanor. The scene returns to the present day in the sunny capital where Demian walks, focused on finding the correct location for his investigation. The boy knows very well that the Merchant Guild had already been doing various charitable works even before the start of the Great War. Analyzing the 40 options in the capital, he deduces that if he filters out only those that do charity work, only about 7 remain. Since only wealthy guilds can afford charity, he decides to focus on investigating those with the greatest accumulation of capital. The golden twilight begins to blanket the mountains, revealing that the boy spent the entire day searching for the correct guild. Tired, Demian stands before a large wooden door, hoping that this is the last place in his long search. The young man knocks and opens the door slightly, politely asking if anyone is there to assist him at that moment. A merchant in a vest approaches in a friendly manner and asks with a welcoming smile how he could help him today. The boy bows respectfully, explaining that he has come to propose an investment to help the guild's noble charitable cause. The man praises the young man's generous nature, but Demian focuses on confirming if this is indeed the place he's been searching for. To the boy's surprise, the man introduces himself as Wiak, the leader of the Hamel Guild, which instantly triggers an alarm in his mind. Realizing he has finally found his target, Demian introduces himself and accepts the invitation to sit down and talk calmly. Seated at the table, the young man asks a direct and curious question, inquiring whether the merchant happens to have a son. The shopkeeper finds the question amusing and replies, laughing, that he has no sons, only a young, immature daughter. The boy is disappointed to hear that, thinking that his search may have failed because of that incorrect information. Suddenly, the door opens, making the young man quickly look back to see who is entering the establishment. A female voice announces her arrival, and Demian's eyes widen as he senses that presence is extremely familiar. Upon seeing the young blonde woman, Demian notices the uncanny resemblance to the mysterious person in the white cloak he had seen in his past life. The merchant asks his daughter to introduce herself and explains that Demian is there with the intention of investing in the guild's business. The beautiful young woman approaches with a friendly smile and greets the boy, demonstrating great politeness and friendliness in their conversation. She asks, surprised, if he really wants to invest, and Demian seriously confirms that the information is correct. Demian reflects that although the guild leader in the future was a man, the girl's appearance and age matched perfectly. He wonders if that beautiful young woman actually took over the guild disguised as a man, using her own family name. The girl asks directly what the investment amount would be because future action plans depend on that value. The young man calmly reveals that he wishes to make an initial investment of 300 gold coins and increase the amount in the future. Father and daughter are extremely shocked by the absurd amount and ask, startled, if he's really serious. Wiak adopts a more serious stance and considers that, since it's an investment, there must be something the young person wants in return. Demian reveals that he wants a percentage of the guild's future profits as a direct return on his investment. The man is impressed to see a child make such a bold and strategic investment in such a competitive market. He can't resist and asks where so much wealth came from in the possession of someone so young, raising suspicions about its origin. The boy smiles serenely and says not to worry, as he only wishes to use his parents' inheritance for a good cause. The merchant accepts the answer and apologizes for the indiscretion while Demian gestures amicably, calming the man. They agree to hold an internal meeting to evaluate the proposal, and Demian agrees to wait for a definitive answer. After the boy leaves, the man remains pensive, and his daughter curiously asks what is bothering her father so much. The shopkeeper smiles and comments on how impressive it is to see such mature determination in a young person of only 13 years old. He emphasizes that the boy's gaze is that of someone very experienced, making it clear that he is by no means an ordinary young man. The father jokes that if the boy were a little older, he would be the ideal suitor for her, making the girl blush. The young blonde girl is extremely embarrassed by the joke and yells at her father to stop teasing her. She hides her face, red with embarrassment, while her father continues to laugh amusedly at his daughter's shy reaction. After closing the big deal with the guild, time flies by and the long-awaited day of military enlistment finally arrives. Standing before the camp, the young warrior fixes his gaze on the horizon, aware that this is the true beginning of his journey. Although his first life ended tragically, he reaches out to the sky, confident that everything will be different. Clenching his fist with magical energy, the young centurion vows to himself that this time he will conquer the entire empire once and for all. The boy enters the military barracks looking for his platoon, which corresponds to the 3rd Training Company. Looking around, he finds no one he knows and wonders if his new friend Appel ended up in a different group. Sitting on his new camp bed, the young man laments the fact that his only friend his age ended up in another platoon. Suddenly, a loud voice echoes, welcoming everyone, causing Demian to turn around in surprise to see who is speaking. A muscular, smiling man introduces himself as Brian, the leader in charge of the first platoon next month. The commander raises his hand and announces firmly that he will immediately begin a rigorous inspection of personal belongings. Brian warns with a smile that anyone hiding tobacco or alcohol will suffer serious consequences, leaving the new recruits frightened. The other young people panic and begin emptying their bags, while Demian just watches them silently. The boy thinks his classmates are foolish, and the leader loudly orders everyone to put all their belongings on their beds. Brian examines Demian's bed and quietly concludes that there is nothing illegal or suspicious among the few belongings. The officer comments that the boy seems extremely young to be there and asks what the new recruit's real age is. Demian calmly replies that he is only 13 years old, leaving the platoon leader completely perplexed by the revelation. Two nearby recruits scoff at the situation, grumbling that the army has become a joke for accepting such young children into the troop. The boy glances sideways at them, infuriating the mohawk-wearing recruit with that defiant look coming from a child. Demian closes his eyes and decides that it's not worth wasting his breath arguing, but he keeps that provocation in his mind. The young man vows to teach that insolent boy the hard way that being hit by a child hurts just as much. Feeling a terrible chill, the other recruit trembles, not understanding why, until Brian approaches him in an intimidating manner. The officer orders him to empty his bag immediately, and the frightened recruit tries to lie, saying he already took everything out. With a macabre smile, Brian asks if he'll need to search the suitcase personally, leaving the con man sweating with terror. Desperate, the recruit throws all the contraband onto the bed, begging for mercy when he realizes his plan has been discovered. The platoon leader walks around the room warning everyone that if anyone is caught hiding contraband, there will be punishment. He warns that the culprit will spend the entire night running non-stop around the camp under severe punishment from the troops. Demian observes the scene with a discreet smile, finding the punishment inflicted on his cheating roommate well-deserved. Brian sighs in relief and declares that the first phase of inspecting the platoon's personal belongings is complete. He then explains that he needs to appoint an interim leader to command the platoon when he himself is not present. The officer slowly pulls a piece of paper from his pocket and decides to check the test scores to choose the best recruit. Brian smiles as he notices a recruit with excellent grades and flawless performance on the camp entrance exams. He loudly calls out Demian's name, searching the dorms for the candidate with the highest scores. The recruit with the mohawk is startled, imagining that the boy from before is the one with the best physical performance in the platoon. The officer locates the young man and asks him directly if he is Demian, receiving a calm and affirmative response from the boy. Brian is shocked to discover that the brilliant recruit with the best performance of all is actually the 13-year-old boy. The platoon leader takes a step back in complete astonishment, unable to hide his surprise in front of the entire troop. He asks if the boy is really that age, and Demian calmly confirms that the information is correct. The envious recruit angrily protests loudly, arguing that a child leading the platoon would turn the army into a playground. Brian orders him to be quiet, but the young man with the mohawk continues to complain disrespectfully to the commander. He argues that the interim leader should represent authority and that the chosen candidate should prove their actual ability. The young man points aggressively at the boy, stating that the troop's discipline will crumble if he is chosen. Demian finds the argument boring, but gets annoyed when he realizes the fool insists on testing his patience in the bedroom. The boy smiles and retorts mockingly, saying he would do a better job than any idiot with a brain made of muscle. Brian asks if the insolent recruit's name is Kyle and warns that before deciding on leadership, he needs to resolve something. Suddenly, the officer grabs Kyle by the collar, demonstrating that he will not tolerate insubordination under any circumstances. With a grim look, Brian warns that if he insults or disrespects any colleague again, he will suffer serious consequences. The officer assures him that the next warning will not be friendly, and Kyle, frightened and sweating profusely, immediately agrees to the order. Brian releases the recruit and reflects that, despite everything, interim leadership needs respect to exercise its authority. Kyle recovers from the shock and suggests an alternative to the officer, raising his hand to ask permission to speak again. He proposes a quick duel against Demian, stating that whoever wins the contest will prove they have the necessary strength and leadership. The platoon commander looks at the boy and calmly asks if he agrees to engage in that physical contest. Demian closes his eyes and accepts the challenge, thinking that this is a good opportunity to instill discipline the hard way. The boy points at Kyle, laughing, and says he just needs to crush that mountain of muscles, leaving his opponent furious. Brian asks firmly if the rest of the group agrees with the duel, and they all respond in unison, confirming their support. The officer decides not to waste any time and orders everyone to accompany him to the training yard to begin the competition. Kyle walks with a wicked grin on his face, confident that he will give the boy a humiliating beating in front of the entire platoon. Demian maintains his completely serene and cold expression, ready to demonstrate the true power of an experienced centurion. The instructor explains the rules of the fight and asks if Demian and Kyle are ready to begin the duel. Kyle gives a confident and arrogant smile, stating that he is now completely ready for the contest. Demian nods calmly, showing that he too is ready to fight. The instructor steps aside and gives the official signal for the combat between the two recruits to begin immediately. Kyle taunts him, saying he feels bad for hitting a child, but Demian tells him to shut up and attack. The brute becomes extremely furious at the boy's insolent reply and grinds his teeth in anger. Kyle rushes forward at full speed, yelling that he's going to beat the boy up for his insolence. Demian observes his opponent's swift advance and notes that he is even agile compared to the soldiers of the past. However, the young warrior shows no concern as his opponent approaches him. Kyle throws a violent punch, but Demian easily dodges the blow, showing that he's on another level. The opponent is perplexed to realize that the boy dodged his attack as if he had anticipated the movements. Irritated, he says that was just a cheap trick and tries to land another quick blow on the young man. The punch grazes him and Demian taunts his opponent's slowness, further enraging him with the miss. Kyle gets tired of missing his punches and decides to use all his brute strength to try and smash the boy into the ground. The big guy lunges at the boy, trying to grab him and put an end to that annoying mobility. With extreme agility, Demian dodges once again with precise movements without even being touched by the hands. Kyle is completely lost, not knowing where the boy went, until he hears his voice right behind him. Without wasting any time, Demian delivers a powerful, energy-infused punch directly to his side. The opponent falls to their knees, feeling the impact of the mana attack that makes it difficult for them to breathe properly on the ground. The big guy struggles to get up, and the boy praises his resilience for still being able to move. Consumed by hatred, Kyle lunges forward, screaming desperately that he will kill the young man no matter what in the fight. The young man dodges the chaotic attacks and decides that it's time to end the duel once and for all. A precise and devastating punch strikes the opponent's body squarely, immediately halting their advance. With the powerful blow delivered by the young man, the brute is pushed back, letting out a cry of intense pain. The opponent's body falls heavily backward as he begins to completely lose consciousness. Demian wipes his hands and notices that the big guy has fainted before coldly glancing at the other recruits. With a frightening and imposing presence, the young man asks if anyone else present wants to try to fight. All the other recruits recoil in fear, shaking their heads in denial, too afraid to take a step. The instructor officially ends the fight, declaring Demian the winner and appointing him as leader. Kyle leaves the infirmary with his head down and softly announces that he is leaving the room. He walks thoughtfully and feels humiliated for having fainted and been rushed to the infirmary. Kyle realizes he lost consciousness after receiving the very first punch and doesn't remember the rest of the fight. He laments having been defeated so easily after believing that no one there could be a match for him. Upon opening the door to the dorm, Kyle is surprised to find his teammates there. The recruits whisper amongst themselves, fearing that the big guy will cause trouble again and get beaten up until he comes back there. Kyle slowly approaches Demian and calls his name, making the boy look back intrigued. To everyone's surprise, Kyle kneels before Demian and declares that from now on he will serve him as leader. The boy is completely confused and wonders if he hit the brute too hard on the head. Kyle sincerely states that it is the duty of a true warrior to respect whoever has proven to be the strongest. The young man realizes that despite appearing to be just a bully, the brute takes the value of respect very seriously. Demian extends his hand to help his colleague to his feet and says that titles aren't necessary, just calling him by his name is enough. The two shake hands amicably, promising to work together for the good of the platoon from that day forward. A week passes quickly since enlistment, and the recruits continue their grueling training regimen. The young man runs side by side with his comrades under the blazing sun, reflecting on the rigors of that harsh military routine. The training finally ends, and the instructor orders everyone to return to their quarters except Demian, who must follow him. The boy is quite confused by the surprise order, not knowing where the officer intends to take him immediately. They arrive at the large door of the administrative office, and Demian wonders if there will be any announcement. Upon entering, the boy notices that the leaders of other classes are already gathered and lined up at the location. As Demian takes his place in line, one of the recruits watches him with disdain, annoyed by the younger man's presence. The recruit openly mocks the boy, saying he's so skinny he looks like a praying mantis, he's so frail. The cheeky recruit imagines how funny it would be to see the skinny guy next to the giant Kyle, since they are such opposites. Demian coldly asks what he's staring at, and his rival responds irritably with yet another silly provocation. The boy calls Demian a brat, while the other classmates in the hallway laugh at their silly argument. The instructor appears unexpectedly, ordering absolute silence and questioning the reason for all the commotion. The recruit warns in a threatening tone that he will resolve things later, while Demian simply ignores him silently. The officer reveals that he summoned them to announce the major platoon competition that will take place in a week. He orders everyone to prepare their respective teams very well, and the leaders respond firmly. The instructor dismisses the group of leaders, who begin to leave the office murmuring about the news. A young man with brown hair approaches Demian, catching his attention in a rather friendly manner in the hallway. The annoying rival interrupts, yelling that the boy doesn't know how things work and threatens to beat him up right there. The friendly recruit defends the young man, pointing out that everyone there is a leader and tells the troublemaker to go train. The aggressor tells the boy not to interfere, but the defender responds with a confident and defiant smile. The boy suggests they simply ignore that idiot, and Demian agrees, calmly leaving. Midway through the journey, Demian stops for a moment to speak with a colleague who had just helped him in the discussion. The boy asks which platoon he belongs to, and the young man proudly replies that he leads the 4th platoon. Demian gives a mischievous smile and warns that he will remember this, and that they will see each other at the big team competition. The young man follows him down the hallway with curiosity, and asks if he is indeed the famous recruit named Demian. He reveals that he's heard a lot about the boy through his friend Appel, and that he knows about his first-place score on the test. Gerard introduces himself as the leader of the 3rd group, and says he is eager to see his rival's skills. Upon returning to the lodge, Demian firmly opens the door, drawing the attention of all the group members. His teammates look on curiously, and Kyle immediately asks what's going on after their meeting. The young man announces that a competition between the pelotons will take place in a week, and begins to dictate the strategy. The boy confidently states that their team will win first place in the tournament no matter what. He claps his hands to get their attention and emphasizes that there is a very important additional goal for them. The young man explains that their main focus will be to completely crush the 4th platoon of their insolent rivals. With a grim look, he details that he especially wants to destroy the leader of that enemy platoon in the battle. In the 2nd week of training, the atmosphere at the military camp changes completely as the event approaches. The officer gathers everyone, explaining that the focus is on winning, and warns that he will teach a crucial battle formation. He points out that recruits with the best individual performance will earn valuable extra points on the test. The young men accept the challenge, motivated by the chance to join the military division they so desire. Demian gives a confident, knowing that everyone will do their best for this great reward. The officer demonstrates the wedge formation, explaining that it serves to easily break through the enemy's defensive line. The tactic has great offensive power like an arrow, but if the tip is knocked off, the whole structure collapses quickly. However, the young man knows that with a strong warrior in leadership, the power of a frontal attack can be devastating on the field. The officer orders them to split into 2 large groups to immediately begin practicing that tactic. Demian takes command of one side and sends Kyle to the other team, who accepts, determined not to lose. The boy gathers his entire group to share some essential tactical positioning tips with them. The boys question where he gets so much experience, and the young man invents a story that he learned everything from his late father. Then he whispers a secret plan detailing exactly how they should act when the other team advances. The boy's clever idea has everyone very excited and confident about achieving victory in that training session. He organizes the line by asking the strongest to stay right behind him and the shorter ones to protect the sides. With the barrier erected, Demian instructs the soldiers to raise their shields to protect everyone's heads. The boy observes the opposing team's formation and notices that they have adopted a posture focused entirely on defense. He yells at his men not to slow down and warns that he will break through the enemy line with just one blow. The instructor raises his hand and gives the signal to begin combat, authorizing a direct confrontation between the 2 teams. On the other side, Kyle's soldiers advance in a very coordinated manner, marking their steps uniformly. Demian mentally praises the coordination of the opposing team, which advances quickly without hesitation. Seeing that they are extremely close to Kyle's barrier, the boy orders everyone to quicken their pace. The imminent impact creates enormous tension in the courtyard, with the 2 groups poised to collide violently. At that moment, Demian begins to channel his hidden mana into the shield, ready to unleash an overwhelming attack. The young man decides to use all his mystical power at that crucial moment in the contest to push his opponent. The boy slams his mana-infused shield into his opponent, generating a massive gust of wind. He orders his allies to press hard and focus on the gaps in the enemy formation. The plan works perfectly, leaving Kyle's defensive barrier in complete panic, unsure of what to do. With his gaze focused, the young centurion realizes that this is the exact moment to deliver their final blow. The boy shouts for everyone to advance at once, taking down the rival group's defenses with their weapons. The training spears pass through the gaps and destabilize the opponent's legs with precision. The defenders completely lose their balance and fall heavily to the ground, failing to understand that quick tactic. Kyle becomes indignant upon seeing his fallen companions and shouts furiously, ordering everyone to get up quickly. The brute senses his group's imminent defeat and attempts one last desperate effort in the fight. Suddenly, Demian appears right in front of him and blocks his advance, reminding him that he is his true rival. Pushed back, Kyle grits his teeth in anger and orders the young man to get out of his way immediately. The boy simply dodges with a quick and sarcastic deflection, asking if he really thought he'd let him pass. With this quick movement, the brute completely loses his balance and becomes utterly disoriented. Demian delivers a precise blow that sends his opponent flying to the ground, ending the fight for good. The young man compliments his physique, but emphasizes that he needs to learn to use his strength intelligently. Watching from afar, Instructor Raymond is amazed, realizing that the boy is even better than he'd heard. He finds it hard to believe that a boy with such an average physique could lead so brilliantly. The training assistant shouts, ordering the end of the fight and declaring Demian's team the official winner. The boy congratulates his classmate for his effort, and Kyle smiles, promising that he will succeed next time. Kyle approaches, curious, asking what strategy they use to focus precisely on their weaknesses. The whole team starts excitedly discussing how they want to use that same tactic in the big peloton battle. Demian proudly observes that the recruits who previously skipped training are now practicing on their own to improve. The young man feels the atmosphere is excellent, but suddenly hears someone talking about the leader of the 4th platoon. The boy turns around, confused, when he realizes that there are people watching him and whispering suspiciously nearby. Some rival recruits mockingly point at Demian, making fun of him for being so young and trying to lead the platoon. Demian's teammates hear the insults and are extremely outraged by their rival's disrespect. The provocateurs persist in their mockery and ask derisively if their group is really that pathetic. The troublemaker leader joins in the mockery, blaming the boy for not knowing his place and pretending to be a leader. Demian stares at him expressionlessly, wondering if that idiot is really begging to get beaten up. The young man tries to ignore the pointless conflict, but his allies turn red with rage, wanting to defend their honor. The boy looks back in surprise, realizing that his companions don't intend to let this go unpunished. The recruits shout furiously, gesturing and vowing to completely destroy their rivals in the official tournament. Kyle takes the lead in the chaos, pointing directly at the troublemaker leader and threatening to kill him in the courtyard. The big guy asks Demian if that group is the so-called 4th platoon, and the young man just confirms a little awkwardly. They unite in a vow of rage, declaring with absolute fury that they will crush their rivals in the competition. Driven by hatred, the soldiers decide to forgo rest in order to continue training hard until nightfall. The boy observes the scene in time, surprised that they fell for the provocation, but begins to ponder the matter. Demian smiles broadly, realizing that his teammates' fury is actually a very positive thing. Meanwhile, back at the barracks office, Instructor Raymond reports directly to the company commander. Captain Varus reviews the documents and asks if there are indeed any promising recruits in the new training class. Raymond confirms that there are indeed some talented young people, but emphasizes that 2 stand out brilliantly. The superior notices their youth, and the instructor reveals that both seem to know how to control and manipulate mana. Surprised, the chief questions them about their origins, but the officer says they don't seem to have a noble background. He reflects that ordinary farmers would not have access to mana cultivation techniques because it is too expensive. Reports show that Demian and Appel's records are too simplistic, which raises deep suspicions. The captain changes the subject and asks about the earlier commotion, and Raymond reveals that the boy was involved. He explains that because Demian was too young for leadership, the other groups mocked and tried to humiliate him. However, the boys' platoon became so furious that it ended up uniting firmly around its military leadership. The commander finds the situation extremely interesting and smiles, intrigued by the young man's potential. The captain snaps his fingers in intrigue and proposes an unusual idea to test the new recruits. They begin whispering the details of the secret plan to see how the young people will react under intense pressure. The instructor fears the idea might go wrong, but the captain insists this test will define their limits. The captain smiles maliciously and orders that the training level of both rival groups be increased to the maximum. Suddenly, Kyle and the other recruits feel a terrible chill down their spines, unaware of their terrible fate. In the barracks, the recruits complain about having received extremely rigorous extra training as punishment. One of our recruits is complaining about them adding an exhausting crawling test because of a silly fight. Kyle asks if the rumors about the punishment are true, while Demian thoughtfully reflects on the aforementioned exercise. The boy imagines exactly what the superior's plan is, but knows that there's not much he can do anyway. Demian gets up and walks around the room, asking firmly if they joined the army just to play around. He explains that the crawling test will be tough, but will help them gain much more endurance than their opponents. The men are embarrassed to see the younger man's maturity and decide to immediately stop complaining about the training. The boy gives a welcoming smile and promises to give some helpful instructions to make the exercise easier for everyone. A recruit fears having to crawl over rocks, but Demian jokingly warns him that the army won't provide soft mattresses. Kyle notices his experience and asks if he's crawled before, receiving an affirmative answer from the boy. Demian remembers spending entire nights crawling through the mud in his past life just to survive. The boy gives a wry smile, thinking that the instructors don't know the true purpose of that training. The tactic of crawling under barbed wire serves to physically exhaust the soldiers until they are covered in cuts. This extreme fatigue generates irritation and internal conflicts, destroying the unity and harmony of any team. The young man deduces that the superior's true objective is to test which of the platoons will be able to maintain unity. He decides he won't fall into that obvious trap and orders the men to take the socks from the supply kit. The roommates are extremely confused by the unusual request, not understanding its purpose. With a bright smile, the boy announces that he will show how those simple socks will become true lifesavers. The following day, the recruits gather before the instructor in the camp's crawling obstacle course. Officer Nilsson introduces himself as being in charge of today's activity and orders his assistant to take his position. The training assistant lies down on the ground and demonstrates the correct posture using opposite legs and arms. The officer points to the difficult field of barbed wire and asks if everyone is ready to begin the test. The team responds enthusiastically, making the instructor notice the determination shining in their eyes. The officer wastes no time and shouts, giving the official starting command to the first group of rookies in the test. The recruits crawl with full force under the dangerous, pointed metal barriers of the course. Nilsson finds it strange that they're administering this test so early in the schedule, and questions what the captain's intentions might be. He reflects that crawling over sharp stones is painful, and imagines that the boys will suffer greatly there. Suddenly, the instructor's eyes widened in complete shock as he noticed something unbelievable on the course. He notices with surprise that the boys are crossing the path with impressive speed and without complaining. The officer is completely perplexed, as it's their first time taking the test, until another rookie calls him over. The second group asks when the course will begin, and the instructor stammers in surprise, giving the starting signal. The second group moves forward with the same excellent energy and great enthusiasm, leaving everyone speechless. Nilsson watched coldly as the young men sped past, as if they were furious warriors on a battlefield. Demian chuckled to himself, knowing the coach had never seen anyone complete the course with such perfection before. Kyle praises the plan highly, and another colleague jokes that it was difficult to fake pain there. The young man reveals that using cut-up socks as makeshift elbow and knee pads cushion the impact. The boys celebrate happily and unharmed, and begin to wonder if Demian is a true military genius. The officer loudly announces the end of the activity for the first group, and orders everyone to return to the barracks. As they walk back, Kyle curiously asks where the boy learned such a clever defense trick. Demian calmly replies that he learned from his late father, but emphasizes that he also received valuable advice. The boy jokes that the rule was not to get caught by the instructor, who now punishes them by making them crawl around 100 times. Kyle laughs at the advice, patting Demian on the back, who wonders if the big guy is getting revenge on him. The boy focuses his mind on the upcoming tests, eager to train in the legendary spear art of the Kingdom of Dakian. Although ignored by the nobles, this spear technique proved unbeatable if mastered with total perfection. The young man knows that few have fully mastered the method, but remembers that for his past self, it was all he had. In his past life, the young man trained as if his life depended on it and grew even more upon meeting his former master. Demian smiles wistfully, wondering if his master is still mad, and promises himself that he will see him again someday. The recruits enter the barracks completely exhausted and complaining of the pain from crawling over sharp rocks. Kyle comments that the fourth group also just finished training, but notices something extremely strange about them. The leader of the fourth platoon shouts furiously, ordering absolute silence from his team, who are crying out in pain from their wounds. Kyle and Demian stare in astonishment as they notice a large commotion beginning to form in the middle of the hallway. The members of the fourth platoon rebel against their leader, arguing with him because of exhaustion and disrespect. Demian's allies watch from afar, commenting that they would be in the same situation if they hadn't worn the protective socks. The rival leader sees Demian's group smiling and happy, and becomes extremely irritated by their joy. They suspect the boys' group used some dirty trick, and blame them for receiving all that punishment. The opponent clenches his fists in hatred, vowing to crush each and every one of them in the upcoming platoon competition. While his rival plots revenge and fights for first place, Demian remains completely calm and focused on his plan. Time flies by, and the big day of the long-awaited competition between the barracks platoons finally arrives. The four groups line up in the courtyard, and the officer announces that he will soon announce the order of combat for the event. Kyle approaches the young centurion and calls him over, noticing something quite different and intriguing about his features. The brute stares at him, intrigued, commenting that the boy seems somehow changed since last week. The boy wonders if he has grown in size and remembers that he is still in a phase of physical development. His teammates laugh and say that Kyle is too big and should stop making fun of the leader's height. However, Demian is surprised, wondering if his colleagues somehow sensed his newfound mystical energy. The previous night, the young man had managed to raise his mana to the second level, greatly increasing his power reserves. All the effort and daily meditation at the camp finally yielded the desired result for the young warrior. Focused on the tournament, Demian discreetly calls Kyle to finalize the last details before the first battle. The young man reveals with a very serious look that he wants to win this team competition by a landslide against the others. He knows that the 5 best warriors in the tournament will be able to choose any magical item from the kingdom's arsenal. Most winners choose weapons with low-level spells that are considered only rank C. But Demian's secret objective is a mysterious ring he heard about from his past life of combat. The special item grants a highly valuable permanent ability equivalent to an A-rank artifact. To secure the ring, he needs to win everything because he knows that if Appel chooses first, he can get the item sooner. Kyle asks if the young leader will really be able to accomplish that and receives a very confident response. The big guy claps his hands, drawing the attention of all his teammates in the yard. He announces to the team that the young centurion intends to dominate the competition and secure the top spot on the podium. The teammates shout excitedly and angrily confirm that they are ready to conquer victory once and for all. Seeing the motivated group, Demian smiles and the officials announce the team's first match over the megaphone. With utmost determination shining in their eyes, the first team advances united to give their best in combat. The tournament is divided into offense and defense, and the groups switch roles at the end of the first round of practice. If the attacking group fails to capture the enemy flag within the time limit, it will lose the contest outright. The boy assumes the correct posture, guiding his team to prepare very well for the first attack. He instructs everyone to act according to the plan and training, and the men confirm with great energy. The leader reminds Kyle to use his brute strength to push back his rivals, and the brute confidently confirms. The starting signal is given, and the two formations begin to move towards the inevitable clash of shields. The second group advances, shouting furiously, determined to completely crush the boys' team's defense. The initial shield clash is violent, but the defenders shout to keep the barrier firm in the courtyard. The attackers try to force their way through, but are surprised to find that the barrier resembles an iron wall. From a distance, the officers notice the solid structure built by Demian, but they believe it serves only for defense. However, the superiors are startled when they hear Demian's command ordering everyone to push at once. Kyle channels all his immense mystical power into the shield and unleashes a devastating charge against his rivals. The force of the counterattack is so great that it begins to desperately push back the opponent's front line. The opposing captain shouts indignantly, unable to accept that his attacking group is being pushed around like this. The young centurion shouts Kyle's name, ordering him to advance even stronger to secure their victory. The brute uses all his energy, completely destroying the rival formation and throwing them far to the ground. The enemies fall to their knees in despair, calling Kyle a monster for pushing through the entire barrier using only his shoulders. Demian quickly advances, ordering the big guy to position himself right beside him so they can continue their advance. They continue pushing with full force, causing the entire opposing defensive line to crumble in a humiliating way. The opposing leader is shocked, unable to understand how the boys' team has such perfect coordination on the field. Demian identifies a perfect opening in the enemy defense and orders his team to make the final charge. The coordinated attack by the first group completely overwhelms their opponents, quickly ending the contest. The officers watch in astonishment and ask if there was extra training, but the instructor admits that he is also surprised. Raymond reflects with dismay that the performance of those young rookies is equivalent to that of the kingdom's elite soldiers. The officer watches the group celebrate, knowing full well that the only reason for that tactical miracle to happen. It is undoubtedly the brilliant leadership and precise orders of young Demian commanding his group of rookies. The instructor recalls that the first platoon trained hard voluntarily every night under Demian's tutelage. They execute the movements taught by the boy with precision, protecting themselves perfectly during battle. Raymond smiles proudly, admitting that the young man proved his leadership ability purely through sheer talent. Identifying the perfect moment, the boy shouts to Kyle, warning him that this is his big chance to win. Kyle smiles confidently and moves forward with a firm resolve, focused on capturing the main objective to secure the points. The brute finally achieves his goal, leaving the enemy leader completely desperate at the prospect of defeat. The opposing captain shouts frantically, ordering them to forget the attack and focus solely on stopping Kyle's advance. However, Demian's allies act quickly, forming an impenetrable barrier of shields around their friend. Kyle taunts his opponents, who are left completely speechless when they see that the giant has no intention of moving from there. With a mocking smile, he warns that the opponents have fallen perfectly into the trap they planned. The rivals turn completely pale with fear when they realize they've been utterly deceived by the mixed team. Suddenly, an extremely fast figure darts across the battlefield toward the main objective. Demian uses Kyle's back as a springboard to jump high, leaping over the entire defensive barrier. The boy flies through the sky holding the victory flag before the incredulous gaze of the opposing captain. He lands with surgical precision, planting the flag and defeating the enemy leader with a spectacular impact. The rival captain falls to the ground defeated, and the officers announce through a megaphone the official end of the game. Demian raises the victory flag as his entire platoon celebrates their well-deserved victory with shouts of joy. The officials admit with amazement that the boys' team is on track to win everything by a landslide. However, Captain Varys disagrees and enigmatically warns that the dispute is far from being decided there. The commander points to the other side of the courtyard, suggesting that there is another strong group emerging. He questions whether that other group wouldn't be a worthy opponent to face Demian's peloton. Meanwhile, the irritated leader of the 4th platoon stamps his foot on the ground, frustrated with how his battle is going. He complains about having difficulties against the very team he intended to use only as a warm-up. His soldiers despair when they realize they cannot break through the rival's solid defensive barrier. The enraged leader shouts desperately at his men, ordering them to strictly follow his attack plan. Members complain that he only shouts orders from behind without helping, revealing that the group has zero teamwork. Gerard notices the opponent's fatigue and asks Appel if they should attack them, but the blonde man decides to reject the suggestion. The young genius explains that they just need to maintain their defensive position, because their opponents will fall apart on their own over time. Gerard agrees, amazed by the ability of the 14-year-old blonde boy to read the battlefield. He thoughtfully reflects that his blonde friend is definitely not an ordinary child and wants to know his origins. The leader of the 3rd platoon loudly orders them to hold their defensive position against the advancing enemy. The violent clash of shields occurs, but the coordinated defense holds firm, resisting without any break. The opposing captain becomes enraged, accusing them of cowardice for merely defending themselves to waste time in the duel. Gerard notices that his rival's energy has run out and knows that the best thing to do is wait until they both lose their patience completely. Exhausted and weak, one of the attackers from the 4th platoon collapses to the ground, no longer able to hold onto his shield. Realizing the opponent had fallen, the leader of the 3rd platoon shouts, ordering an immediate counterattack from the group. The defenders launch a powerful charge, exploiting the enemy line's weakness to crush them. The attackers are in despair as they watch their defense be completely destroyed by the powerful impact of their opponent. The team leader shouts Appel's name, releasing him to make the final play and secure their victory. The young blonde prodigy runs at high speed across the field, ready to capture the target and win the contest. Appel gains momentum by leaping towards the opposing defensive barrier with great speed and precision. The young blonde man flies gracefully over the entire enemy formation, which is left completely frozen in surprise. With his training spear in hand, he prepares to deliver a fatal blow and secure victory for his group. He strikes his opponents with a rapid sequence of blows, knocking them all down at once and securing the objective. The opposing captain is in despair, yelling at his team, unsure how they will face the first group. The leader of the 4th platoon looks surprised towards Demian, who calmly observes him from the other side of the courtyard. Demian sighs, knowing the fight is over, and the officers announce the 3rd platoon's victory over the megaphone. Appel celebrates in the arms of his friends, and Demian mentally acknowledges that the blonde will be a formidable opponent. The boy walks back, aware that the real challenge of the grand final will be against the 3rd group. With a confident smile and enveloped in mana, Demian can hardly wait to reunite with his friend at the big decision. The instructor loudly announces the end of the rest period, ordering all platoons to assemble immediately in the training yard. Kyle comments to Demian that their rivals in the 4th group will be desperate to try and score points against them. Kyle wants to smash his rival's face, but Demian warns him that he's already marked his opponent and tells him to focus on clearing a path. The boy analyzes the opponents and realizes that their team is completely exhausted and lacking teamwork. The young man gives a grim smile, aware that he will not go easy on them and intends to crush them quickly and definitively. Kyle eagerly anticipates the dispute, stating that those gossips will pay dearly for all their insults. The leader of the 1st platoon orders everyone to maintain absolute focus in order to end that battle in the blink of an eye. The teammates smile confidently and respond promptly to the young hero's leadership command. The 1st platoon assumes battle formation, holding their shields, with the boy leading at the front. On the other side, the rivals are also preparing, but their expressions are much more tense before the instructor's signal. The announcement of the start of the combat resonates strongly, unleashing the decisive and direct confrontation between the two teams. Demian's soldiers advance united and coordinated toward their opponent right at the start of the great battle. The two formations move across the field under the watchful eye of all the camp officers. Demian notices that the opposing team's structure is very weak and disorganized, making a direct attack easy. Even so, the boy wants to ensure a flawless victory so that his opponent will never dare to challenge him there again. The young centurion gives the command to Kyle, who charges like a furious beast against the enemy shield line. The colossal impact of the brute throws opponents into the air, displaying an utterly absurd force in the charge. The rival captain falls into complete despair, cursing the allies for failing to contain the enemy's advance. He tries to reorganize the defense by shouting for everyone to protect the flag at all costs during the charge. Suddenly, Demian leaps over the shield, appearing right in front of the startled rival leader to catch him by surprise. The opposing captain's eyes widened in complete shock as he saw the boy appearing high above his head. The young man strikes his opponent in the chest with a devastating shield slam, causing him to let out a sharp cry of pain. The opponent falls to his knees, dropping his weapon, while Demian lands calmly and gracefully. The defeated man stared at him with eyes red with hatred, complaining of feeling extremely humiliated and offended. The boy tries to grab his training weapon again and angrily asks if the other boy thinks he's as weak as a scarecrow. He charges angrily, declaring loudly that in a one-on-one duel he is capable of easily defeating the young centurion. Demian dodges the spear strike with extreme ease and thinks to himself how predictable his attack is. The boy neutralizes his rival's weapon with his bare hands and coldly asks if that's all his power has. The young man disarms his opponent by easily pulling the spear from his hands, leaving his rival completely bewildered. Demian throws the enemy's shield aside, finding it disappointing that he lost his weapons in such a pathetic way. With a precise movement, the boy strikes his rival's body, delivering a decisive blow that sends him to the ground. The young man steps on the back of his fallen rival and coldly states that losing his weapon in the field is like asking to be killed. He channels mana into his fist, warning that this strict advice will serve to save his opponent's life in the future. The boy delivers the final blow, throwing his opponent face first onto the dirt floor with a resounding impact. The opponent collapses, bleeding, and the assistants rush to help him, while Demian thinks the fight was too easy. The officer assesses the opponent's physical condition and concludes that the rival group is no longer able to fight. The young centurion picks up his spear from the ground, preparing to finally announce the outcome of that great battle. The officers officially declare the overwhelming victory of the 1st platoon, and all the recruits celebrate loudly. Kyle gives a genuine laugh, saying that the beating was very invigorating, and praises Demian's brilliant leadership. The other groups comment in admiration on the impressive tactics of the young leader, who is only 13 years old. The coaches praise his skills, admitting that the boy may be even more talented than they are. Veteran Raymond nods with a smile when he suddenly notices important movement coming from the courtyard. He turns his face away in confusion upon noticing the imposing arrival of a high-ranking military carriage at the location. An imposing, one-eyed, long-haired weapons master emerges, revealing himself as the legendary instructor Leonhardt Belkane. All recruits and officers stand at attention, offering a respectful military salute to the visitor. The legendary one-eyed master asks the commander if the promising newcomer he praised so much is the boy in the courtyard. The officer confirms with pride as Demian continues to be launched into the sky by his happy companions. Leonhardt smiles, intrigued by the scene, realizing that a young man with great potential has indeed joined the troop. Back at the military barracks, one of the comrades runs in desperately, announcing that something incredible has happened. He enthusiastically reveals that a very important military official has just paid a surprise visit. A recruit remarks that the legendary instructor from the 3rd Division had all the other officers standing at attention. Demian becomes curious and asks the man's name, but his roommate struggles to remember what it was. The boy is immediately surprised to hear the recruit suggest that the legendary instructor's name might be Ryan Hart. He then whispers the master's real name, realizing it is Leonhardt. Upon hearing his friend confirm his name, the boy jumps up and begins to move quickly. The roommate is very confused by the sudden reaction and shouts, asking where he's going. Demian ignores the question and simply dashes off, running down the long corridors of the barracks. He needs to personally confirm with his own eyes whether that man is indeed his former master. The young man suddenly stops in his tracks when he sees the man walking ahead in the hallway. The experienced, one-eyed warrior notices the boy's presence and asks if he isn't the recruit from earlier. The officer accompanying the legendary warrior smiles, saying that they were already on their way to meet Demian. The boy quickly takes his position and gives a firm military salute in respect for the superior's presence. The man asks if his name really is Demian, and the young man promptly replies affirmatively. He knows the division is linked to the camp, but he didn't expect to see that person again so soon. The young man becomes emotional when he faces the man who was once his great master and spiritual guide. The warrior explains that he became curious to meet him after hearing many compliments from the demanding officer Raymond. Observing the boy closely, the master realizes that he is already practicing an excellent method of mana control. He praises the spear technique demonstrated earlier and asks which unit the recruit plans to join in the future. The boy hesitates for a brief moment before revealing his true and ambitious choice. With a confident smile on his face, Demian announces that he plans to join the feared Neocala's unit. The answer leaves both the master and the officer accompanying him completely shocked by such audacity. This unit is known for being extremely brutal and dangerous, confronting terrifying forest monsters. The warrior questions why he didn't choose something easy, and the young man says he only wants to become stronger. Leonhardt offers a letter of recommendation for the Order of Knights, leaving the officer beside him astonished. The young man politely declined the invitation, stating that he had made the decision in order to reunite with someone very special. The master respects the boy's firm decision and orders him to return to his lodgings to rest. The officer runs after the master, indignant at seeing the boy squander an opportunity reserved for nobles. The subordinate asks to try to convince him again, but Leonhardt questions whether the decision was truly bad. He explains that the other officer certainly didn't notice the frightening determination in the boy's eyes. The experienced warrior chuckled, finding the boy, only 13 years old, extremely intriguing. He orders them to leave the boy alone because he knows their paths will cross again in the future. The following day, the first group prepares to face the strong opponents of the third group. Demian encourages his teammates, stating with conviction that no team in the camp is capable of beating them. The soldiers smile and agree that they have indeed become very powerful with the recent training. The young leader smiles confidently and orders them to crush their opponent, just as they always do. The official combat signal is given, and the two platoons position themselves in the courtyard to begin the duel. Demian takes the lead and yells for everyone to form the shield barrier immediately. Viewers notice that the team is using the same extremely solid tactical formation as before. The boy warns young Appel that his role in this endeavor will be crucial to the success of the strategy. The order to advance is given forcefully, and the shield group begins to march together in sync. The barriers collide with absurd violence, generating a tremendous roar in the middle of the battlefield. Demian orders them to push hard, while the opposing leader notices that the attack pattern is the same. The opponents struggle to withstand the impact, and the young leader shouts, ordering Appel to take immediate action. The young blonde man positions himself perfectly in the open space, created in the middle of the solid defensive barrier. The opponent is completely shocked to realize that they have opened a gap in their own formation. Appel concentrates and focuses his vision directly on the weakest point in the opposing army's defense. With a devastating spear thrust, he strikes the enemy barrier, shattering their shields with extreme precision. The opposing leader watches the scene, completely frozen, unable to believe the speed of the attack. His teammates shout in celebration of Appel's success and advance to finally break through the defensive line. A strong enemy defender attempts to impede the advance by charging furiously to hold back the group's onslaught. Kyle charges forward with monstrous force against his opponents, who are astonished by such physical power. Demian thinks that thanks to his giant friend, they managed to stop the opposing advance at the last second. He acknowledges that Appel's strength is impressive, as he manages to break through the defense with just one blow. Demian wonders what kind of monster from the north that blonde boy is, and what he's doing in that barracks. On the other side, the blonde man realizes things have gotten complicated, because the big guy is staring intently in his direction. In the lodgings, Demian had instructed Kyle to focus solely on the blonde opponent to thwart his attack. The giant asked who this warrior was, and was told that he would know exactly who he was as soon as he saw him. With a fierce grin on his face, the hulking warrior now knows very well who he is fighting against. The leader of the 3rd platoon questions whether the blonde man will be able to get through, and he affirms that he will do it no matter what. Appel realizes he can't defeat the giant opponent, using only brute force, and decides to change tactics. The talented young blonde knows there's only one way to guarantee his team's victory in the fight. He channels his powerful blue mana directly into the spear and swiftly advances, delivering a terrifying blow. Everyone screams in surprise upon seeing that the giant managed to withstand the devastating impact using only his shield. The blonde boy grins wildly and begins to strike repeatedly until he breaks through his opponent's defense. The big guy struggles to hold off the attack and wonders how someone Demian's age can be so strong. Appel's overwhelming attack completely shatters the shield, leaving the giant exposed and defenseless. The young blonde man raises his weapon with a focused gaze and shouts, announcing that this will be the end of his opponent. The wounded warrior tries to protect himself with his arms, anticipating the impact of his rival's final blow. Suddenly, Demian appears with extreme speed and steps in front to defend his teammate. The young leader blocks the violent spear blow with his shield, generating an impact of mystical energy. The two prodigies stared intensely at each other, and the blonde smiled as he pronounced his opponent's name. At that very moment, the whistle blows loudly across the courtyard, signaling the end of that round of the competition. The boys in the 1st platoon look up in surprise, trying to understand the announcement that the fight is over. The instructor announces that time is up, and that the 3rd platoon has lost because they failed to capture the flag. Appel is annoyed that he couldn't win easily, and is impressed that the giant withstood the attacks. Demian quickly approaches his wounded companion to check if he is all right after the battle. The leader suggests that his friend rest during the second half, but the stubborn giant refuses, saying he's fine. Demian warns that there are still 2 weeks of training left, and that worsening the injury now could jeopardize his future. He asks his friend to defend the central flag, and the giant realizes that the leader is sparing his pride. Kyle accepts the mission to guard the objective, and orders his allies to advance with everything they have to crush their rivals. The officer on the platform orders a change of sides and commands the 1st platoon to prepare for the attack. The young leader gathers his weary team and announces that he intends to settle the dispute quickly. With an extremely focused gaze, the boy sets a time limit of just 5 minutes to secure victory. He turns to the side with impeccable determination, ready to execute his tactical plan before everyone. On the other side of the courtyard, the warriors of the 3rd platoon stand firmly in their defensive line. The young prodigy plans to steal the opposing team's flag and secure victory within the allotted time. The two large formations of recruits stand facing each other under the watchful eye of the instructor in the center. Demian thoughtfully reflects that the time has finally come to play the grand final match of the tournament. He knows he demonstrated his full tactical and strategic ability while serving as interim leader. The boy decides that this is the perfect time to make an excellent impression on the army officers. He wants to prove his true worth to everyone using only his new identity as Demian. The young man knows that a victory against the group from Fort Appel will guarantee him the title of most honored recruit. The blonde opponent holds the center flag, knowing it would be difficult to fight on the front line exhausted. Demian observes his rival's positioning and realizes that a direct confrontation between them will be inevitable. The signal to combat is given, and the officials officially begin the grand tournament final between the groups. The young man commands his team to advance at full speed from the start, and his allies furiously confirm his advance. The The defenders are terrified to see Demian's team running so fast without breaking formation. The enemy captain orders shields raised, warning everyone to be very careful of the mixed attack. Demian executes a perfect low dodge, knowing that any defensive effort from them will be futile. He channels his powerful purple mana into the tip of his spear, determined to pierce the rival's shield barrier. Demian delivers a frontal blow with his spear, fully charged with mystical purple energy. The overwhelming attack breaks through the enemy barrier and pierces shields with extreme ease. He performs a swift sweep, throwing defenders to the ground with the impact of the area attack. Enveloped in mana, the young leader commands his group to definitively break through the opposing line. The defenders scream desperately, trying to contain the powerful mass onslaught of the attackers. The rivals try to counterattack the boy immediately, shouting that they need to take him down right away. The protagonist skillfully dodges and slides past the group's onslaught. The opponents are bewildered by the agile movement, and their weapons end up clashing in midair. Demian lands a precise clean sweep, knocking down his opponent who complains of ankle pain. Without wasting any time, the boy shouts, calling his platoon to reorganize the tactical formation. The defenders are startled to realize that Demian's squad has already reached their base. The rival leader is perplexed by the incredible speed and focuses his hopes on Appel's strength. Appel focuses, knowing that stopping Demian's advance is the only way to save his flag. The blonde youth asks his leader to hold the flag, while he himself tries to stop his rival. The partner accepts with apprehension, knowing he will have to depend on such a young boy at such a critical time. Demian sees his opponent approaching and thinks this will be the great and decisive final duel. He recognizes his opponent as the future and legendary general of the kingdom known as Appel. Appel takes a running start and leaps toward Demian to deliver a first blow with his spear. Demian is thrilled at the great opportunity to test his skills against a future general. He skillfully dodges, realizing immediately that the first move was merely a feint. With a sly smile on his face, the young protagonist prepares to respond in kind. Appel attacks with full force, unleashing his brilliant blue mystical energy to break through the defense. Demian manages to block the impact by crossing his spear, surprising his rival with the reaction. The blonde warrior quickly recoiled from his stance, surprised by his opponent's immense physical resistance. Demian channels his mystical purple energy into the spear and challenges his opponent to a fight with everything they've got. He leaps, delivering a devastating blow determined to defeat the blonde man with maximum force. The weapons of the two young prodigies clash with extreme violence, generating sparks of pure mana. Appel is shocked to see that Demian's mystical power was strong enough to break his spear. Being thrown backward, the blonde man wonders if his opponent also hides a noble origin. The blonde boy is impressed by his opponent's impeccable mana control. He feels like he's facing an insurmountable wall right there in basic training. Demian walks calmly and asks them to end the dispute once and for all. The protagonist goes for the final blow, stating that his rival will not be able to withstand the impact. The young man unleashes the final attack while his opponent tries in vain to defend himself. Appel falls defeated to the ground and deeply regrets not being able to save his flag. The flag of the third platoon falls in the courtyard, sealing the definitive end of the tactical contest. The instructors announce the victory of the first platoon, and all the allies celebrate happily. Appel remains lying face down in silence, trying to digest his first significant defeat. Demian calmly walks towards his defeated rival to congratulate him on his effort. The young man offers to help the blonde man to his feet and receives congratulations along with a promise of revenge. Demian jokingly suggests they fight on the same side next time, as it would be difficult to beat him again. Appel smiles, telling his rival to stop exaggerating, while Demian considers his monstrous potential. For now, the young centurion just wants to enjoy the big celebration with his team. Master Leonhardt watches from afar, proudly celebrating the excellent result of the first platoon. The legendary one-eyed warrior smiles calmly, appreciating the moment with his pupil. He decides to let the young recruits fully savor the taste of their well-deserved and sweet victory. Kyle is speechless at the sheer amount of special food served to them in the cafeteria. The teammates celebrate excitedly, eating prime cuts of meat and declaring that winning the tournament was well worth it. Demian observes his happy allies and understands their joy at being able to eat meat after so long. The boy looks at an empty table and laments that his master has already left before they could talk. The young officer approaches the celebratory table and asks if he may sit with the new recruits. He asks if the boy still maintains the same decision to refuse Leonhardt's strong recommendation. The officer deeply regrets the rigid selection process, as it was a golden opportunity for any soldier. Then the man casually changes the subject and asks if the young man knows of any new gossip. He reveals that the master also offered Appel a place in the Order of Knights and asks what he chose. Demian calmly says that he will respect the other person's choice because life and decisions belong solely to Appel. The man laughs sincerely at the mature comment, stating that the young man sometimes seems like a silly child. The officer thinks to himself that he has failed in his mission to make him reconsider and decides to give up the attempt. The man raises his glass of wine in the hall, drawing everyone's attention to make a closing toast. He sincerely wishes everyone good luck and advises them to get ready because the heavy training resumes tomorrow. All the recruits raise their glasses with great excitement and shout in unison a salute to the kingdom. The days pass quickly at the barracks until the third and final week of official training begins. The soldiers perform grueling spear drills in the courtyard under the constant shouts of orders from the instructor. Demian notices that the attitude and commitment of all the platoons at the camp have improved after the tournament. The boy proudly believes that the recent competition served as a great catalyst for uniting and motivating the recruits. An officer shouts in the courtyard, announcing a 5-minute break so the boys can rest a bit. Kyle approaches his leader, wiping away sweat, and excitedly asks if he's heard the latest news. He recounts that the atmosphere in the 4th platoon completely collapsed and that many of them decided to leave the army. The giant laughs, mocking his former rival leader who fled immediately after being defeated in the tournament. Demian calls his friend's attention and warns him that mocking others isn't what really matters right now. The boy explains that although they won as a group, each one still needs excellent individual performance scores. He recalls that the great dream of ordinary soldiers is to obtain the tranquil position of Royal Administrative Guard. However, the competition is fierce, as very few manage to register and only a minority win a place in the palace. Kyle agrees thoughtfully, knowing that the competition will be fierce due to the excellent conditions of the position. The giant becomes desperate and grabs Demian, asking in fear if he also intends to compete for that same slow spot. The protagonist denies it, and his friend is surprised because, with his grades, it would be very easy to get the position at the palace. Demian asks if his friend would really like to live locked up and suffocated inside the castle all day. The giant hesitates, admitting it would be boring, but questions whether they shouldn't try to go to the best possible place. The protagonist says to forget it because an active warrior like Kyle wouldn't be able to endure being imprisoned for even a single month. The giant understands Demian's argument and curiously asks which unit his friend intends to go to then. The young man replies seriously that he has chosen to enlist in the dangerous and feared Neokala's unit. Kyle panics upon hearing the unit's name and begins shouting that his leader has finally lost his mind. Demian loses his temper and kicks the giant's leg, telling him to shut up and stop the scandal. Rubbing his bruised shin, the big guy laughs and says that deep down he already expected a crazy decision from him. Kyle bursts into laughter, saying that his friend is completely insane and that's exactly why he likes him. The rest period ends and the recruits return to the exercises excited, knowing there is one less competitor. At the end of the month, the commander warmly congratulates the recruits for their excellent performance at the official graduation ceremony. Demian smiled, realizing that the day to leave training had arrived, as if they had only enlisted a few days ago. The military leader wishes the young people much success on their journey, encouraging everyone to contribute to the kingdom's future. One of the instructors approaches Demian and calls him over as the solemn ceremony continues in the main courtyard. The officers shout orders to salute, and the graduates perform a fine salute of respect to their superiors. The official concludes the ceremony and announces that he will now call the 5 best recruits from the center. All the boys swallow hard with nervousness as they await the revelation of the big winner. The officer announces Demian's name as the class's grand champion, to the immense celebration of his allies. Next, the commander summons Appel from the 3rd platoon to present himself at the front along with the victor. He finishes listing the top 5, including Kyle and the other leaders who stood out significantly in the tournament. The instructor instructs the group to follow him, revealing that each of them will receive a weapon from the royal arsenal as a prize. Standing before the iron gate, he announces that they can choose any item and calls Demian to go in first. Demian confirms with a smile, aware that the great moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. He takes his first step inside the armory and is impressed to see how well organized the place is. The protagonist examines the potions in the cupboard, wondering if there is some hidden treasure in that storage space. He decides to stop searching and focus only on grabbing the item he needs, so he can leave as soon as possible. Demian walks with determination, unable to take her eyes off her target since entering the room. The young man reaches a higher shelf, mentally celebrating having finally found the object. He wields the mysterious mystical ring that grants temporary invisibility when activated with mana. He knows the other recruits would never notice the ring because none of them can use mana. Demian exits the warehouse, and the instructor calls Appel inside to make his own prize selection. He wonders if his rival will also get hold of that special ring, since it possesses mana and he can sense its power. The protagonist stands outside, very curious and eager to see what kind of item the blonde man will come out with. Suddenly, Appel bursts out through the large doors of the weapons depot much faster than anyone expected. Demian's eyes widened in confusion, unable to understand how the other boy had managed to make his decisions so quickly. Kyle notices the leader's frightened expression and asks what's wrong, but the boy says it's nothing. However, Demian realizes in shock that there is no doubt that the seal chosen by Appel hides something very serious. He sees the coat of arms of a ruined kingdom on the seal, and wonders how the blonde boy learned to control mana. The young man deduces that perhaps the mysterious blonde rival has some hidden connection to that kingdom of the past. The instructor gathers all 5 winners from the courtyard, asking if each one managed to secure their prize. He examines Appel's seal, asking if the blonde boy knew what it was, and the boy says he only feels divine energy. The man laughs in agreement and explains that the mystical seal has the power to ward off all kinds of bad luck. He praises the excellent spear chosen by a recruit and Kyle's sturdy shield, crafted by a renowned artisan. Upon seeing the pale ring Demian had chosen, the superior asks in astonishment if he truly wants to keep it. He explains that the item only serves to slightly reduce the body weight of the person using it. The superior jokingly suggests that the protagonist put the ring on his finger to immediately test its effect. Demian leaps swiftly and realizes with surprise that his weight has decreased much more than he imagined, making his steps easier. The officer inquires about the sensation, and the young man responds happily, stating that the item exceeded his expectations. The young man gives a sly smile, knowing that the weight reduction and invisibility make him a rank A artifact. The officer gives the order to return so that everyone can fill out the registration forms for their desired units. In the records room, the superior hands over the official papers and orders Demian to fill out his own form. The protagonist signs the document with determination, writing the name of the dangerous neocalites unit. The instructor thinks it's a great pity the boy isn't going to the knightly order where he would easily thrive. The young man hands over the completed form and the supervisor reluctantly accepts it, unable to change the recruit's mind. He warns worriedly that the place is terribly dangerous and asks the boy to be extremely careful. The coach congratulates the young man on his tough month of training, and Demian respectfully thanks him for all the support he has received. The boy leaves the room, closing the wooden door silently behind him, and takes a deep breath in the hallway. The boy walks, feeling a mixture of nostalgia and joy, until he hears his name being shouted right behind him. Demian turns around and sees Appel walking towards him, revealing that he had heard about his destiny inscription. The blonde man indignantly questions why he doesn't go to the knights, and Demian says that's not his place. Appel proudly reveals that he accepted the position and will join the order with Leonhark's letter of recommendation. Demian puts his hand on the blonde man's shoulder, praising his wise choice and assuring him that his rival will do very well there. The blonde man laughs, finding it funny that his friend is praising something he himself rejected, calling Demian unpredictable. Appel expresses his sincere concern about the dangers of the neocalites unit, urging him to take care of himself. He extends his hand with a big, friendly smile, asking them to promise to meet again in the future. The protagonist firmly shakes his rival's hand, expressing immense gratitude for the affection and kind words. Watching the boy walk away, Demian wonders if the blonde boy knows that in the future he will be the great general of the kingdom. He imagines his rival could become an even bigger monster, and looks forward to meeting Appel again in the future. The protagonist decides that now is the perfect time to go to the hostel to say goodbye to his friends. He opens the door to the room and notices that the vast majority of the recruits are already packing their bags to leave. Kyle spots the leader immediately in the hallway and shouts his name with open arms, running towards him. The giant hugs him and jokingly complains that he thought his friend would leave without even saying a final goodbye. The brute grins mischievously and mysteriously warns that they will see each other much sooner than they imagine. Kyle shouts in the middle of the room, drawing everyone's attention to hear the young leader's farewell speech. Demian thanks his platoon mates for their excellent effort and wishes them all good luck in their future units. The soldiers happily celebrate, thanking their leader for his support and promising to meet again in the future on the kingdom's roads. The protagonist finally leaves the training camp wearing simple clothes and carrying his travel backpack. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls to him from the middle of the path, momentarily interrupting his solitary journey through the woods. He turns around and sees Dial from the Merchant Guild, who greets him politely with a cheerful smile after quite some time. She shows me a building and hands over official documents, detailing perfectly how the investment funds were applied. Seated in the meeting room, she projects an excellent financial return based on the original proposals made by the boy. The young man examines the papers and is extremely impressed by the impeccable organization of the report she presented. The young woman tells him he can ask questions, but the young man thinks the document is too perfect to raise any doubts. He decides to proceed with the business and announces that he will soon send a trusted employee with additional funds from him. She suggests detailing the contract in writing, but the young man makes a friendly gesture, saying that such formality is not necessary. Demian explains that contracts are only useful when there is distrust and assures that he fully trusts her honesty. The young woman is completely surprised by the great maturity shown by the young man and comments that he is truly unique. She places a very beautiful, ornate chest on the table and asks the young man to check his investment funds. Suddenly, the girl's eyes widened and she stammered in fright as she looked at the revealed contents of the beautiful wooden chest. Demian smiles, revealing that he sent much more gold than promised as a sincere token of gratitude for their partnership. She tries to recalculate the contract, but the protagonist interrupts her with an outstretched hand, saying that everything is fine. He appreciates that the young woman treated him with complete seriousness as an investor, regardless of his childlike and youthful appearance. Dial asks if he just graduated from training and wants to know which combat unit the boy will be sent to now. The protagonist replies matter-of-factly that he is going west to serve in the dreaded Neocala's unit near the Great Forest. She panics, asking if he volunteered, and he jokingly questions whether the best recruit would be sent there by force. The boy jokes that if he dies, the invested money will be freely available under the complete control of her own guild. The girl gets angry at the morbid comment and seriously asks the boy to avoid making jokes of that dangerous nature. The young man is startled by Dial's firmness, realizing that despite her gentleness, she can be extremely sharp when necessary. She asks what day the trip to the west will be, and Demian promptly replies that he will leave in exactly 3 days. The young woman understands the answer and assures him that she will use his investment in the best way possible to generate excellent profits. She bows in farewell, and Demian thinks with satisfaction that all the financial matters have been resolved successfully. The boy thinks that in 3 days he will be in the terrible forest, and decides that he should use his free time to eat a lot. He spends the following days eating kebabs, drinking happily, and sleeping soundly to rest his body. When the day finally arrives, Demian puts his backpack on his back and walks through the forest, looking at the map of the route. The boy thinks he has managed to gather all the necessary supplies, and that now all that remains is to begin the long journey. Suddenly he hears a strange noise coming from right behind him in the woods and looks to the side, extremely suspicious. Kyle emerges from behind the tree carrying a huge backpack and lets out a loud laugh, confirming the promised reunion. The protagonist stares at him in utter disbelief and asks if the big guy really did what he's imagining. The giant states earnestly that their great friendship and partnership would never end simply at camp. He reveals, laughing, that he also signed up for the Neocala's unit and puts his arm around his friend, inviting him to fight together again. Demian gives a wry smile, and the two companions take their first steps toward the new journey that awaits them in the west. Suddenly, a shrill warning scream tells them both to wait, making the pair look back in great fright. Dial appears running exhausted down the road and wipes the sweat from her face, relieved that she wasn't late for the meeting. The protagonist asks what she's doing there in the middle of the woods and points, confused, to the immense structure that's right behind her. She reveals with a smile that she arranged for a luxurious carriage because she knew the journey to their base was long and tiring. The young woman says she filled the vehicle with food and supplies, and Demian asks why she did all that for him. She replies that it's simply a humble way of reciprocating all the honesty and immense trust he has shown her. Dial explains that his guild always repays debts of gratitude and confesses to having spent days preparing everything for the trip. Kyle whispers, astonished by the young woman's tremendous generosity, as she bids them farewell, urging them to be very careful. She says, laughing, that it's just a strategic investment for the future, and Demian smiles, understanding her insight. The young man laughs heartily, commenting that she's a terrible liar and that he thinks the merchant is far more intriguing than she initially seemed. The two business partners bid each other a fond farewell, and the protagonist walks happily towards his vehicle. He climbs the wooden steps of the carriage with firm steps to enter the luxurious cabin that will take him to his final destination. Dial remains silent in the middle of the road, watching the vehicle slowly disappear on the horizon, heading west towards the kingdom. The luxurious carriage sped along the rough dirt road, revealing the military fortress in the distance on the horizon. Kyle feels very unwell due to the violent swaying of the vehicle and complains about the road, but acknowledges that walking would be far too tiring. They spot the guards at the entrance to the Urkel garrison, and Demian finds it strange that there is no one in the streets. He suspects that the citizens' disappearance is due to fear of monsters, or that perhaps they are working in the dangerous forest. He explains that the vast majority of the inhabitants there earn their living harvesting the dangerous medicinal herb called a mancho in the forest. This root is poisonous and causes serious health problems, but when refined it becomes a powerful anesthetic from the kingdom. The boy gets out of the vehicle knowing that the peasants will never leave the dangerous place, because a large part of the kingdom's grass comes from there. The protagonist calls his burly friend to hurry up and head straight to meet his dreaded military unit. The two young recruits walk together in silence through the dark and quiet alleyways of that melancholy city of Urkel. Kyle stops abruptly with a frightened expression on his face and calls out to the protagonist as he spots their destination base ahead. The burly young man asks incredulously if that large, frightening dark fortress is really the place where they will be serving. His friend complains that the base looks like it's falling apart, but Demian remains completely silent, smelling a strong odor of blood. The protagonist interrupts Kyle with a serious warning, alerting him that someone is definitely approaching the location in the fog. A somber group of weary and staggering warriors slowly emerges from the thick fog, exiting through the base's wooden gates. They stagger forward, bruised and exhausted, while helping to carry one of their allies who is severely wounded in combat. The protagonist closely observes the official emblem, with crossed swords firmly engraved on the heavy armor of the group's leader. Demian silently watches the solemn passage of those warriors who don't even notice the presence of the new recruits. The melancholy platoon of wounded soldiers crosses the main stone arch and disappears into the inner darkness of the fortress. Kyle, cold and frightened by the morbid atmosphere, commented with a shiver that all those warriors looked like true war ghosts. The boy tells his friend to get used to the tension, because it's a place where survival is fought tooth and nail every day. As he takes his first step, Demian closes his eyes and recalls a striking lesson from his past that suddenly comes to mind. In his past life, the warrior, clad in imposing armor, asked the recruits what the most important duty of a soldier was. The young recruits gave enthusiastic answers citing blind obedience or crushing and eliminating as many enemy forces as possible. The legendary commander listened to the arguments in silence, demonstrating a clear and profound dissatisfaction with their mentality. He delivered a hard blow to the rookie's head, who complained furiously, not understanding why he was the only one to get hit there. The leader responded by saying that was the worst possible answer, and stated that a soldier's only real obligation is not to die. He ordered the recruits to value their own lives and fight to survive by any means necessary and return home safely. The subordinates listened attentively to the crucial lesson. They needed to become very strong just to ensure their survival. Back in the present, the boy smiles sadly as he remembers the faces of his old allies who, unfortunately, all ended up dying. He calls his partner to come inside the military station immediately, and the big guy hesitates, afraid to face the daunting interior. Demian reminds his friend that their purpose there is to get strong, and that wasting time standing at the entrance will yield no results. Kyle worriedly warned that the veterans looked terrible, and suggested waiting for the tense atmosphere to ease a bit before going in for good. Ignoring his companion's hesitation, the boy walks fearlessly towards the great black gates of the terrifying fortress. Kyle curses in frustration and dashes off after the stubborn protagonist, who is already entering the immense dark stone structure. Inside the garrison, an angry veteran throws his training armor against the crates, shouting insults at the guard. He shouts in outrage, revealing that they lied about the patrol and that they faced dozens of orcs along with a fearsome orc wizard. Another ally desperately warns that his friend's arm is destroyed, and that if he doesn't receive treatment, he will be forced to discharge. The Neocali's unit seal is displayed with the stark warning that for punished members, military discharge will never be an option. The fate of offenders is harsh, and they are forced to rot in prison for the rest of their lives or fight bravely in this hell. The cruel alternative is to fight to the death and be completely crushed and spat back out by the Neocali's unit forces. The wounded man cries out in despair, questioning how his injured companion will manage to survive and live if he is expelled without his arm. Commander Taran appears authoritatively in the room, ordering that an experienced doctor and a temple cleric be summoned immediately. The warrior tries to warn about the exorbitant price of the temple, anxiously stating that everyone's pay doesn't even cover a fraction of the costs. The commander throws a heavy bag of coins onto the counter, handing over 20 of his own gold coins to cover the entire treatment. The subordinate is startled, explaining that the gold was for his mother's surgery, but Taran reassures the young man, saying that she has improved. The other warriors remain in absolute silence, moved by the noble gesture of personal sacrifice demonstrated by the commander. Moved by their plight, they decide to donate their own savings and throw their few silver coins onto the pile to help fund the rescue effort. The newest recruit tries to hand over his coins to contribute, but the veteran with the scarred cheek shouts, preventing the action. He yells at the young man to use the coins to repair his old combat boots, telling the boy to quickly save his own money. The boy tearfully begs for help, feeling utterly guilty for the terrible injury suffered by his wounded leader. The scarred veteran praises the boy's kindness and agrees to immediately call the temple cleric to treat the wounded man. One of the soldiers runs to carry out the commander's orders, who then turns to Yahello and asks his current age. Yahello proudly replies that he is 18 years old, and the commander reminds him that it has already been a year since the youngest of them enlisted. Taran hopes the wounded man can hold on until help arrives when suddenly another guard hurriedly calls him. The messenger excitedly announces that the new recruits he had mentioned earlier have just arrived. The veterans in the room stared at the news with somber looks and weary expressions, showing no sign of joy. The platoon commander admits, surprised, that he had completely forgotten about the arrival of the rookies due to the combat. The unit leader firmly calls Yahello by name, and the young soldier promptly rises to his position, saluting. Taran amicably puts his arm around the boy's shoulders and invites him to accompany him to the entrance of the fort. He smiles slightly, calmly explaining that they will give their newest successors a proper welcome. Sitting in his office, the commander fixes his gaze on the two young men and asks if they are the unit's new recruits. He observes Kyle's robust body and silently assesses that the big guy possesses an excellent physique for combat. However, the leader shifts his focus to closely analyze the intriguing traits of the young protagonist. He asks in astonishment if the boy is really only 13 years old, and Demian confirms it calmly. Yahello notices with shock that the newcomer is much younger than himself, and wonders what would bring a boy to that hellhole. Taran sighs as he looks at the files, admitting in confusion that he can't understand the mentality of today's youth. Kyle tries to praise his friend and proudly points out that Demian was the #1 recruit and the best graduate of the entire tournament. The commander coldly retorted, stating that the camp's titles are worthless because that place is a different reality. Demian calmly replies that he already knows that, and the soldier asks, intrigued, why he decided to enlist there anyway. Without getting a direct answer, the commander gives up insisting and calls Yahello again, who promptly steps forward. He points his finger and orders Yahello to take the new recruits to their places and make them clean the area. The blonde veteran turns around with a serious look and commands the pair of rookies to follow him towards the dormitory corridor. The three young people walk silently through the dark stone corridors as they make their way to the inner dormitory area. Yahello explains that there are no rigid job titles in the Neocala's unit, and that traditional positions should be forgotten there. He stops in front of the wooden door and warns that below the commanders, the group's hierarchy is based on arrival time. The young man opens the room and coldly tells them to choose any available bed because they won't be theirs for long anyway. Kyle stares at him, completely confused and uneasy with the grim revelation, immediately asking what he meant. The veteran explains that he's been there for a year but remains the newest member and asks if Kyle understands what that means. Suddenly, the blonde man lands a powerful kick to the big guy's shin, who screams in pain and ducks to grab his own leg. The veteran stares at him with a menacing look and warns, in a chillingly serious manner, of the cruel meaning behind it. The blonde man reveals in a somber tone that all the recruits who arrived at the unit after him ended up dying on the battlefield. Kyle recoils, swallowing hard, horrified by the macabre reality, while the young protagonist remains completely indifferent. Yahello turns to leave, ordering them to unpack their bags and start cleaning the dormitory, after which they will receive further instructions. The large door slams shut with a dull thud, leaving the two new friends alone in the middle of the old, dusty room. Kyle complains angrily about the veteran's hostile attitude, but the young protagonist only manages a restrained laugh at the situation. The big guy angrily asks why he's smiling again, and Demian dodges the question, saying it's just a whim. The boy glances sideways with a nostalgic smile, thinking that Yahello continues to act exactly the same way as in the past. He walks towards the cupboard, calling his friend over to start cleaning, and the giant asks him if he's serious. Holding a cloth, the protagonist states that if it's a mandatory task, the best thing to do is to perform it correctly. He spreads out the cloth, laughing mockingly, and remarks that this activity could ultimately be considered their first mission there. He yells angrily, asking if he looks like a janitor, while Demian jokes that the place needs to be sparkling clean. Meanwhile, in the Neocala's unit cafeteria, young Dianel remains seated alone, reflecting with a melancholic look. The young man closes his eyes, feeling an enormous tightness in his chest, and mentally admits that he is terribly frightened by everything. He remembers the pain of seeing each new teammate join the group, forge bonds of friendship, and then pass away. The boy remembers calming the frightened rookies on their first patrols by instructing everyone to pay close attention. He used to reassure his comrades by saying that the mission would be simple and asking them to stay in the rear. However, in the forest, a single second of carelessness in battle was more than enough to cost anyone's life. He bitterly understood that the dreaded military garrison of Neocalas is exactly that kind of cruel and merciless place. He sighs wearily, remembering how tired he is of protecting the newcomers, knowing that they would all inevitably end up dead afterward. However, the new recruits who have just arrived deeply disturb him in some intriguing and mysterious way. Dianel reflected, intrigued, thinking that the boy's gaze seemed to recognize him when the shoemaker announced that the repair was finished. He politely thanks them and leaves a few coins on the wooden counter, collecting his refurbished boots. The shopkeeper comments on the presence of two lost young men at the entrance and asks if they might be the new recruits for the garrison. He jokingly points out that the newcomers seemed so weak and useless that he thought they were just part of the regular guard. Dianel bids farewell with a brief bow and calmly announces that he will return to the establishment next time. He walks back thinking about the new recruits and decides he needs to break their pride immediately. He knows that feelings like pride, motivation, and overconfidence only serve to kill soldiers in that hell. Dianel slowly opens the dormitory door, expecting to find an absurd mess and a shoddy cleaning job. However, the veteran's eyes widen in complete shock as he confronts the true situation inside the room. Demian appears smiling cheerfully, his face smeared with dust and a bandana on his head, greeting the return of his superior. The boy points to the room, which is now sparkling and clean as if it were a completely new place, so spotless it is. The other veterans appear surprised and jokingly ask if Dianel had tortured the newcomers to make them clean everything up like that. The boy stammered, sweating nervously, unable to even explain what had actually happened to create that perfection. Demian extends the cleaning bucket with a naive smile and politely asks if the veteran would like to inspect everything. Dianel is shocked to think that people usually only pretend to clean and doesn't understand how the room got so bright. He wonders, horrified, if that overly obedient behavior is some kind of clever, secret tactic of pure provocation. Suddenly, a loud, warm, mystical laugh echoes from behind them, making Dianel turn around quickly in fright. The commander enters laughing loudly and praises their extraordinary effort, saying the dormitory looks brand new. The veterans exchanged astonished glances, unable to believe that the emotionless commander was actually laughing so loudly. The military leader regains his serious demeanor and calmly gestures for the new recruits to approach him. He questions whether the pair really cleaned the entire place by themselves, and Demian promptly confirms with great energy and vigor. The commander asks why they cleaned so thoroughly when they could have simply pretended to do it as usual. Demian replies that he only strictly followed the orders given by the veteran Dianel out of respect for the local military hierarchy. Taran reflects thoughtfully, knowing that his years of war have made him capable of reading the true potential of any warrior. The commander believes that the big man Kyle already possesses the physical stature and technique necessary to go straight to the battlefield. However, the leader admits that he can't read the prodigy and doesn't understand why he chose to suffer there at that base. He suspects there must be a strong, hidden reason for the minor to enlist and calls for everyone's attention in the room to give a warning. The veterans watch, intrigued, as the platoon commander places his hands on the shoulders of the pair of rookies. The commander cheerfully introduces the two newest and youngest recruits to the group, and the allies welcome them with smiles. It all begins in a dark room, where Demian's roommate wonders melancholically when that damned war will finally end. Demian continues staring silently at the ceiling, before coldly replying that everything will only end if they decide to surrender. The companion closes his eyes and earnestly asks the young man to promise that he will not die before him on the battlefield. Demian finds the conversation strange and questions whether he ate something spoiled, but his friend just laughs, insisting that he promise anyway. Now in the present, the boy wakes up in his bed and silently reflects that, even without having answered directly back then, he ended up fulfilling his promise of survival. He painfully remembers finding the lifeless body of that same comrade, impaled by several swords on the devastated battlefield. Demian's gaze fills with a cold, somber determination as he recalls the scars left by that terrible loss. He remembers that his own survival was achieved at the cost of ruthlessly defeating every opponent who crossed his path. The young man sighs irritably in bed, trying to push away once and for all those bitter memories that still haunt his mind. Realizing he won't be able to sleep anymore, he sits up and decides to use the rest of the night to practice his mana cultivation method. Demian silently leaves the base and walks towards the dark forest under the starry sky. Deep in the woods, the boy hears the sound of wind cutting through the air and wonders, intrigued, who could be training at that hour of the night. He peers from behind the trees and immediately recognizes young Dianel practicing blows with an incredibly massive sword. The boy watches the scene and realizes that his barracks mate was already a true training fanatic back then. Seeing Dianel exhausted and leaning on his weapon, Demian concludes that that heavy sword is terribly incompatible with his strength and speed. The boy smiled slightly, remembering how difficult it had been to convince him to change equipment in the past, and he knew that if he said anything now, the blond boy would try to attack him immediately. The following day, the recruits gather before a rocky mountain range, knowing they will face extremely rigorous endurance training. While they await the leader's arrival, a bored veteran suggests a fun bet with his teammates to see if the rookies can endure the training until the end. Several soldiers excitedly throw silver coins and bet that the rookies will faint before even completing the first part of the day. Kyle hears the mocking comments and becomes extremely angry when he realizes how the veterans are underestimating their abilities. Demian observes the calm atmosphere and deduces that this disrespectful and hopeless attitude is completely commonplace in the daily routine of that unit. Kyle is confused when he sees his friends start walking towards the group of gamblers and asks, worried, where he's going. Demian unexpectedly appears before the veterans and casually asks if he can also participate in that fun bet. The soldiers are startled by his sudden approach and call him brave, asking if a mere rookie like him really has any money to gamble with. The boy confirms that yes, but calmly warns that he would like to slightly alter the original terms of that dispute. Displaying a gleaming gold coin, Demian bets that he can beat absolutely everyone present at the training session and secure first place. The veterans exchanged surprised glances and began to laugh at the tremendous audacity of that little rookie standing before them. One of the bettors praises the boy's fighting spirit and accepts the challenge, promising to hand over all the money if he manages to fulfill the promise. However, another soldier provocatively warns that if the boy loses, he will have to wash all their dirty clothes for an entire month. Demian listens to the new punishment and calmly asks if he can also add another important condition to their agreement. The young man proposes that, if he wins the bet, he will gain the right to guaranteed free time during all training hours for the next month. Suddenly, Commander Taron appears unexpectedly, agreeing to the innovative proposal and leaving the veterans completely terrified. The military leader turns around and calls out Dianel's name in a firm tone, who promptly steps forward to answer his superior's call. Taron gives an amused smile and bluntly orders the young veteran to join the endurance contest as well. Dianel hesitates in surprise and the commander taunts him, asking if he's perhaps afraid of being defeated by a mere recruit. The young blonde man glares at the leader with irritation and retorts, saying that he simply thinks it's a waste to spend money on a bet with such an obvious outcome. Taron simply tosses him a silver coin, jokingly announcing that he will make sure to pay the young man's entrance fee. The commander turns to Demian and assures him that if he truly outperforms the veterans, he will earn all the time off he desires. He still flashes a terrifying smile and warns the veterans that whoever loses that bet will face hellish extra training, leaving everyone in a panic. The older soldiers glared at the boy with hatred and vowed to use all their strength to humiliate the cocky newcomer. Demian gives a brief, silent bow, mentally celebrating that his initial plan worked perfectly. He knows he needs to change the depressive atmosphere of that garrison where everyone acts as if they are about to die, because living without hope destroys any warrior from the inside. Taron interrupts the group's thoughts and loudly announces the official start of the day's grueling physical training. The leader points to a huge pile of heavy logs and explains that the exercise consists of running while carrying the wood to the peak of the rocky mountain. The veterans try to protest, indignant at the sudden change in routine, but the commander shouts, ordering absolute silence from the group. Taron fiercely orders everyone to grab a log once and for all and immediately stop complaining about the exercise. The soldiers begin to climb the steep, rocky mountain, exhaustingly and breathing with extreme difficulty under the blazing sun. The veterans show expressions of deep suffering as they climb the rocks carrying the massive logs on their backs. One of the brown-haired soldiers looks at the commander atop the hill and wonders, confused, why he demands such an absurd effort from them. Dianel runs briskly with his torso on his back, thinking the punishment is definitely because of the rookies, betting they'll faint very quickly along the way. While trying to catch his breath during the climb, one of the veterans looks back startled and wonders where that damned rookie went. The soldier's eyes widened in confusion as he raised his head, wondering if the boy had somehow managed to get past him. He is completely speechless when he sees Demian running up the mountain at an unbelievable speed, leaving everyone behind. The young centurion lets out a relieved sigh as he carries the heavy wooden log with extreme ease on his back. He looks at his ring in surprise and realizes that the magical artifact is also capable of reducing the actual weight of any objects he is holding. The boy gives a beautiful, sly smile, confirming that he had indeed made the right choice in securing that magical ring as a prize. Demian pauses for a moment in the middle of the stone path and wonders how far away his former barracks veterans are from him now. Looking down, he notices that most of the soldiers are still far away, and that the only one capable of keeping up with him in any way is Yahello. The blond man continues climbing the slope with great difficulty and determination, under the watchful gaze of the young man who observes him from the top. Yahello is breathing heavily, unable to understand how the small rookie manages to maintain such an absurd physical pace. The young veteran focuses his tired gaze and thinks to himself that the boy will undoubtedly reach the top of the mountain in very little time. Back at the military garrison, a soldier emerges running in desperation and calls out to Commander Taran to report a serious incident. The messenger points anxiously to the top of the main building, warning that there is a red alert signal hoisted up there. The officer becomes visibly tense and frightened upon spotting the color of that emergency flag in the courtyard from afar. He recognizes the signal as a maximum-level emergency alert, indicating that something terrible has happened in the region. In moments, all available soldiers gather in formation before the large wooden gates of the military fortress. In the office, Taran seriously questions the reason for raising the signal, and the officer reports that there were casualties in the Brincelian forest. The commander demands to know who the victims are and their exact location, receiving the response that they are herb pickers in a prohibited area. The other officer curses angrily at the peasant's stubbornness and asks what monster could be responsible for the attack, but the soldier admits that there is still no confirmation. The messenger worriedly points out that the victims entered the forest accompanied by 6 strong mercenaries, and yet no one survived to tell the tale. Concerned about the situation, Taran asks Aaron how many combat-ready men they have available to mobilize immediately. The commander orders them to disregard the slightly wounded and assemble a group of about 50 warriors as quickly as possible for the mission. Alone, the leader clasps his hands thoughtfully, fearing that the Brincelian forest is changing dangerously due to the short intervals between attacks. In the sunny courtyard, the commander stands before the armed troops and asks if all 50 men are properly assembled. Taran orders everyone to prepare their respective weapons, when suddenly, he hears rapid footsteps approaching the location. Demian comes running alongside his friend Kyle and firmly announces that they both intend to go with the rescue team. However, the commander immediately denies the request, warning that real combat is very different from basic training, and orders the recruits to remain in the barracks. Demian boldly insists that they act only as rear porters, reminding them that their physical strength had already been proven in the earlier test. Taran closes his eyes, feeling bitter at having to rely on the help of mere newly arrived recruits on an official unit patrol. He eventually relents and allows the pair to go, provided they do not engage in combat under any circumstances and focus solely on carrying reserve supplies. The commander turns around and orders Yahello to immediately hand over the heavy backpacks with the extra equipment to the new assistants. Upon receiving the shipment, Demian remembers that the famous forest holds terrible secrets and tries to recall how things happened in his past life. Yahello approaches him with a very tense look and reveals in a warning tone that there is a real demon inhabiting that dangerous forest. Faced with the serious comment, the boy feigns surprise, finding it ridiculous, but the veteran insists that this creature is no ordinary monster. The boy explains that he wouldn't believe it if he hadn't seen with his own eyes a single possessed orc beat a steel wolf to death. He clenches his fists in anger, remembering that normally it would take dozens of ordinary orcs to face that beast, which forced them to abandon the region. The blond man bitterly states that if it weren't for that hidden threat, the glorious unity of Neocalis would never have been undone in the past. Demian walks thoughtfully, feeling that the information from his past life is too confusing for him to draw a definitive conclusion now. He decides that the best option is to go as a porter, so he can personally analyze what is actually happening in the middle of that Brincelian forest. The commander shouts, drawing everyone's attention, and loudly asks if the warriors have their equipment properly prepared for marching. Taran begins the march by alerting the troops to consider all possibilities in the field, and to avoid extremely dangerous situations at all costs. The leader emphasizes that the priority for each soldier there should be to return alive to the military base at the end of the day. The commander gives the order to depart, and Demian walks excitedly, knowing that the great moment of his journey has finally arrived. With a sharp, focused gaze, the young centurion mentally prepares to face his very first real battle since returning to the past. As they enter the dense forest, Taran ordered them to begin the search, dividing into groups of 3, but stressed that no one should lose sight of their allies. The leader turns to the 2 new recruits and orders them to stay close to him and remain at the rear of their own team at all times. Demian walks forward silently, looking around, and thinks that despite appearing to be an ordinary forest, this secluded place hides something very dark. The young man's gaze becomes extremely serious as he feels a shiver down his spine and realizes that the atmosphere there is very much like that of a real battlefield. Having spent 5 years of his past life immersed in brutal wars, he knows all too well that all his warrior instincts are sending a clear warning. Holding his weapon tightly, Demian confirms to himself that this place in Brincelion is indeed extremely deadly and dangerous. Suddenly, an extremely high-pitched screech echoes throughout the forest, causing Demian's group to go on high alert in the middle of the woods. Commander Taran hears the sounds of quick footsteps and wonders if his platoon has finally located the target of the call. A scout soldier spots his superior and shouts desperately, urging him to come quickly towards the clearing. Upon arriving at the exact location, the warriors are confronted with the mangled remains of the victims scattered across the blood-soaked ground. The brown-haired officer finds it strange that the weapons were left behind, and Taran thoughtfully concludes that the peasants must have been too terrified to hold on to them. Observing the immense tree trunks violently split in half, the commander wonders what kind of creature would be capable of doing such a thing. The subordinate suggests the culprit might be a bear-like monster, but the leader firmly warns that no beast of that type in the forest possesses such strength. The soldier persists, asking if the threat could actually be a giant ogre, but the superior officer immediately denies the possibility. Demian watches the officers arguing from a distance and decides to take a few steps forward to investigate the place on his own. The boy walks through the vegetation and is startled to come across the carcass of a huge red bear lying in the middle of the woods. Analyzing the deep cuts on the creature's body, the boy deduces that the real killer certainly possesses monstrous, massive claws. Demian points to the trail of destruction around them and explains to the commander that this creature perfectly explains the carnage of the peasants. Taran is extremely impressed by the boy's surgical analysis and silently wonders where he got so much investigative expertise. To disguise his secret, Demian lies, saying that his father was an experienced hunter and that he learned a lot just by listening to his stories, earning praise from the commander. Kyle becomes very confused and questions his friend aloud, reminding him that he had previously said that his late father was actually a son. Before his friend can reveal the lie, Demian turns and casts a look of hatred so dark and terrifying that it silences the giant in sheer terror. Taran decides to suspend the search for today and orders that the victims' bodies be carefully collected and returned to their families with respect. The boy fully agrees with the commander's decision, knowing that continuing to advance in the dark without information about the enemy would be sheer suicide. Demian gives a wry smile, thinking that despite his tough exterior, Taran is an excellent leader, and he understands why Dianel missed him so much from her past life. The commander shouts, ordering everyone to quicken their pace and begin the return journey back to the fortress before nightfall. Suddenly, Demian's heightened senses go on high alert as he notices a hostile presence very close by. The boy wastes no time and shouts desperately for all members of the group to be extremely careful where they are. A deafening roar echoes and an immense rock plummets from the heights, striking the rear of the platoon of soldiers squarely. One of the warriors screams in agony as his leg is crushed by the boulder, while the others wonder where that gigantic rock came from. Demian shouts Kyle's name and the big guy drops the supplies, running quickly to help his wounded comrade on the ground. With a monumental effort, Kyle braces his back against the rock, trying to support the absurd weight to prevent his ally from being crushed. Demian leaps onto the rock and channels his mystical purple energy to help propel and lift the heavy rock off the soldier. Thanks to their combined efforts, the pair manage to create the necessary space, keeping the immense stone suspended for a few moments. Taran shouts for all the men to immediately help pull the wounded warrior out of that stone trap. The allies pull their comrade, who is groaning in pain with a severely injured leg after the violent impact of the boulder. Seeing the soldier's grave condition, the commander despairs, but Demian acts quickly and hands over some herbs, instructing the wounded man to chew them immediately. The boy explains that chewing the plant will greatly help extract the medicinal juice to relieve the extreme pain of the fracture, surprising the leader with his attitude. Taran examines the leaf and warns with concern that the amancho herb has an anesthetic effect, but is extremely poisonous if ingested without proper neutralization. Demian calms his superior by revealing that simply chewing it along with the Nemoja seeds completely neutralizes the medicinal plant's toxicity. The commander watches him, intrigued, and silently wonders how a simple rookie boy can possess such advanced medical knowledge about herbs. The protagonist warns that they need to retreat immediately because that rock didn't fall by accident, and the beast responsible must be lurking very close by. A loud bang makes the ground tremble, and Demian falls silent in fright, realizing that the terrifying monster of the forest has just revealed itself right before them. A monstrous creature emerges from the shadows, revealing itself as an immense black bear with glowing red eyes and sharp teeth. The warriors are thrown into utter panic upon seeing the absurd size of that black beast, which surpasses any common monster they have ever faced. Taran draws his sharp battle sword and shouts furiously, ordering all the men to prepare for battle immediately. In the courtyard, the soldiers cross their swords, forming a coordinated defensive barrier and preparing to hold off the beast's violent attack. The monstrous black bear leaps at high speed toward the platoon of soldiers, its sharp claws poised to attack. The commander yells for everyone to dodge quickly before being struck by the creature's slashing claws in midair. He commands the warriors to carry the wounded to the rear and orders them to focus their initial attacks on the monster's legs to destabilize it. The brave warrior Helson draws his enormous battle axe and advances firmly, declaring that he will deal with that beast alone. With a powerful war cry, he swings his heavy axe in the air, delivering a violent blow to the black bear's body. Helson's weapon strikes the monster's flank, creating a deep cut that splatters a considerable amount of the creature's blood across the courtyard. However, the warrior is startled to notice that his weapon is stuck in the thick skin, unable to pierce and bring down the enemy as usual. Seeing the imminent danger, Commander Taran runs towards his ally, shouting for him to stay focused and hold firm in the battle. Sometime later, the scene shifts to the administrative office, where Commander Taran invites Demian to sit down so they can begin an important conversation. Seated at his desk, Commander Taran stares intently at the boy and asks directly if he knows anything about that mysterious monster. Demian maintains his calm demeanor before the leader and replies with conviction that he believes the beast has been corrupted by a terrible demonic energy. Surprised by the revelation, Taran questions whether he is referring to the dark power used by black magicians, receiving direct confirmation from the boy. The commander becomes apprehensive and asks if the young man suggests there are dark magicians operating in the forest, seriously reminding him that the practice of such magic is strictly forbidden in the kingdom. Demian considers that it's still impossible to be absolutely certain about this, but warns that it could be the work of a sorcerer or a living abomination charged with pure evil energy. The boy knows very well that this dark energy is borrowed from demons worshipped by secret sects, and that prolonged exposure to this corrupted power inevitably results in a tragic death. He closes his eyes, remembering that the Brincelian forest harbored a dangerous demonic mana stone, but wonders with concern why this threat is emerging so early in time. The boy recalls that in his past life, the existence of that mana stone was only revealed to the world after a great event that shook the Empire's foundations in the future. Demian's eyes widen with nervousness as he realizes the terrifying possibility that everything they are facing is just the beginning of something much worse. The protagonist reflects that demonic energy grows stronger over time, corrupting more monsters around them, concluding that the only chance of survival is to destroy the source before it becomes too powerful. Taran suspiciously questions how the newcomer knows all these dark details, and Demian deflects, claiming to have heard the stories from his father, who had faced a similar situation in the past. The commander respectfully agrees with the boy's explanation and reveals that he would very much like to hear more details about these past experiences. The military leader admits that the unit is desperate enough to accept any aid, and the young man agrees to continue sharing the knowledge of his supposed father. The following morning, one of the platoon's warriors emerges from the military dormitory, stretching and complaining bitterly about the accumulated fatigue in his body. While the others discuss the extreme exhaustion from the previous patrol, Demian shakes Kyle's giant body, ordering his friend to wake up quickly to start the day. Suddenly, a recruit bursts open the door to the room and shouts excitedly, asking if everyone has heard the big news from the barracks. The messenger gleefully reveals that the Brincelian forest has been declared under total lockdown, making it a strictly forbidden zone for soldiers and harvesters. The news has veterans happily celebrating the unexpected break from training and missions, noting that the rest came at an excellent time due to the large number of wounded allies at the outpost. Kyle notices Demian's despondency and curiously asks why he's so pensive, receiving a disheartened reply from the boy that it's all just a positive thing. Hiding his face with his hands, the protagonist acknowledges that rest is ideal for the troops to recover, but he is deeply concerned about the direction past events are taking. Kyle looks out the window, intrigued, and calls Demian's attention when he notices the sudden arrival of several carriages and strange men at the camp. One of the veterans glances sideways and disdainfully questions why the regular guard is visiting the Neocali's unit's military fort at that hour. In the administrative room, the leader of the common garrison sits cross-legged, maintaining a serious expression before the post commander. Taran rests his hand on his chair and directly asks what would bring the representative of the common garrison to his office. The visitor reveals that thanks to the report sent by Taran, the sacred temple agreed to cooperate in the investigation, confirming that they had felt a strong evil presence coming from the bear carcass. Taran becomes thoughtful upon realizing that Demian's suspicions were correct, and wonders if the forest is truly connected to this dangerous demonic energy. The representative acknowledges that there is still no certainty and reveals that they have decided to send a clergyman from the temple to initiate a large joint search operation in the Forbidden Forest. He suggests that, given the unusual nature of the situation, it would be ideal to enlist the help of the soldier from the unit, who demonstrated the ability to identify that dark energy in the courtyard. Taran hesitates, remembering that the boy is just a mere novice, newly arrived and without combat experience, but the visitor counters, reminding him that it was the boy himself who discovered the threat. The commander understands that refusing the temple's formal request would bring serious problems and political repercussions to his already fragile military unit. Making a decision against his will, Taran turns and firmly calls out the name of his trusted assistant, Aaron. The leader orders Aaron to immediately fetch Demian from the barracks, while the young rookie silently laments his fate on the other side. Walking alone in the woods at night, the boy decides to accept the call, knowing he cannot lose the leader's trust, and that at the right moment he will reveal the whole truth to the commander. The scene returns to the violent combat in the forest, where the immense paw of the black bear strikes the brave Helson's defenses with great force and aggression. The warrior's eyes widened in complete shock as he was brutally struck by the mythical monster in the middle of the dirt courtyard. Helson is violently thrown backward, rolling heavily across the battlefield and losing his weapon. The black bear with bright red eyes charges imposingly toward its fallen ally, who groans in pain, unable to rise in time. The monster raises its monstrous paw, full of sharp claws, preparing to deliver a fatal blow and tear the warrior to the ground. Suddenly, Taran leaps in front and blocks the beast's violent attack with his sword, cursing the terrible monster's power. Realizing that 3 of his men are already seriously injured, the commander takes a firm stance, vowing that he will not let that beast escape alive. Taran roars furiously, ordering the soldiers to continue attacking and pressing the monster without giving it any chance to react. The troop surrounds the beast, and the leader commands them all to repeatedly strike the opponent's body until they manage to pierce the thick hide of the black bear. One of the veterans extends his arm, blocking Demian and Kyle's advance, and sharply ordering the rookies to retreat immediately. The commander identifies an opening and shouts, calling Yahello to act, receiving a quick and affirmative response from the young blonde warrior. Yahello leaps furiously, wielding her immense battle sword, and delivers a spectacular blow that deeply severs the creature's front leg. The black bear lets out a piercing roar of agonizing pain as it suffers the devastating cut from the unit's veteran warrior. Taking advantage of the beast's downfall, Taran assumes a final fighting stance, preparing to deliver the finishing blow to his weakened opponent. With a gaze filled with pure determination, the leader focuses his gaze on his opponent's head and coldly declares that this is the end of the battle. Demian watches the scene, utterly perplexed, as he feels an absurd amount of mana energy begin to concentrate around the commander. Taran leaps high and delivers a devastating sword strike enveloped in mystical light, commanding the corrupted monster to die once and for all. After the violent battle, the soldiers celebrate joyfully by kicking the body of the fallen black bear and mocking their fearsome defeated adversary in the courtyard. While the men celebrate, Commander Taran thoughtfully examines the carcass, mentally admitting that he has no idea where such an abnormal monster could have come from. He extends his gloved hand and very carefully touches the strange, deep dark spots on the creature's skin. One of the warriors approaches, worried, asking if those black marks could be contagious, noting that some plague victims have very similar marks. Demian carefully observes the details of the creature's fur and silently confirms that they are indeed the terrible stains left by demonic corruption. As the commander walks around the body, the boy reflects that the existence of such an abnormal creature can only be explained by a single terrible reason. With an extremely focused gaze, the protagonist concludes that the group urgently needs to locate the source of that evil power before it's too late. Taran orders Aaron to keep guard with the men, while he sends Private Brent to skin the bear to use in making new armor for the garrison. Suddenly, Demian interrupts the command, warning seriously that they absolutely should not use that monster's skin under any circumstances. The commander is completely surprised by the unexpected warning and sharply questions what the young rookie means by that statement. Taran approaches the boy, realizing he is indeed hiding some important secret, and silently accuses him of knowing far more than he lets on. Changing his mind immediately, the commander orders them to put the skin aside to begin the return journey, then tells the recruit to get ready. The military leader commands the boy to follow him immediately to his office, while the entire platoon begins its return march through the dense forest.